Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel and welcome to my Omnibus series. I've got so many of these omnibuses that are going to come out so that you'll be able to listen to an hour's worth of stories, which I know you're going to love. You know, the thing is that telling stories is such a fine art, and it's something that was practiced hundreds of years ago when people didn't have the technology that we have today. And everyone would gather around the fire and listen to a wonderful story. And also, what is so wonderful about a story is that personally, I think it is the best way to go to sleep. Every night when I go to bed, I always listen to stories. And that's something that parents used to do with their children. It's something that they still do with their children. There's nothing better than a good story. And so I hope you're going to enjoy this series. And before we start, I just want to say, do subscribe to my channel because you don't want to miss out on anything. Because I'm in for the long haul and I want to make sure that you get the most stunning stories to go to bed with at night or to listen to when you want to be one of those people sitting beside the fire and listening. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel and let's get started. I hope you're going to enjoy the omnibus.
Dear Sarah, and all your lovely listeners, my first impression of the guest house is that it was remarkably grim. The taxi had driven us down some windy country lanes, some that at one time had been tarmac, but had now been overgrown with rambunctious weeds, while some of the roads were precariously rocky. We had driven through areas consisting of high embankments, viridescent tall trees, without a single solitary soul in our sight, which was really quite airy, given we were from the city, used to the slick, smooth sounds of wheels whooshing on tarmac, people shouting down street corners, taxis honking, impatient drivers blaring their horns loudly. My mother hadn't been joking when she said we were staying somewhere isolated. This was about as remote as you could get. My mother wanted to create as much distance as she could from our father, whom she had recently discovered had been cheating on her. My father had begged for her forgiveness, but my mother was not quick to crumble. She had brought us out into the North Carolina countryside to create space and distance, to reflect on what course of action to take, whether she should forgive my father or not. But by the way things were looking, it seemed that my father might be expecting divorce papers at any time soon. I'd never seen my mother look so angry. Her face was fixed with an expression of indifference, but I could see a glimmer of deep sadness in her blue eyes, an angry tension in her jawline. By all accounts, he'd been seeing his secretary for the last couple of weeks. My mother discovered the explicit text on my father's cell phone, of which I will spare you the details, as the context was very graphic and not for the faint of stomach. He had been taking a shower. She had thrown his cell phone at him under the pouring water, steaming mirrors, suds of soap and shampooed hair, and stormed defiantly out of the house. My father had run after her naked, covered in soap suds, as she was getting into her car to drive away, while a few neighbours had looked shocked to see a naked man humiliating himself in the middle of a busy, bustling street, trying to flag down her car. "You must have done something very bad, bro," said a passerby. "Your other half looks very livid." No words were spoken between my parents at that poignant time, but my father knew my mother had discovered his insidious, dirty little secret. "She threw herself at me," he explained. "She was young, attractive. I was exceedingly flattered that she found me desirable, but it meant nothing." My mother had looked at my father with eyes brimming with tears. "How could you, Stephen?" she had said. "You were my best friend in the whole world, but now the trust between us is severed." We were to learn that this was not the first time that this promiscuous, hoity-toity, flirtatious young lady, Miss Delilah Berger, had thrown herself licentiously at men at her former jobs. She had left behind her a trail of devastation, carcasses of the broken-hearted, a plethora of broken marriages in her trail. My mother had gone to see the young unbridled lady, was shocked to see the woman my father had hired to be his secretary, dressed as though she was working in a brothel, with all her assets firmly pronounced by the tight clothes she was wearing, leaving very little to the imagination. Her enormous bosomy chest seemed to be falling inappropriately out of her skimpy bright red satin top. that looked more like a piece of lingerie than a blouse, and was very inappropriate for a formal office job. Ostensibly, her knee-length satin skirt was so tight that she could barely walk in it, as she made her way to the glass doors of my father's office to open them up for my mother, tottering on heels so high that it was a wonder that she hadn't broken her ankle in the process. "Mr. Connor's not seeing clients today," she told my mother firmly, in a very squeaky, childish voice. My mother had pushed the door open. "It's you I've come to see, Miss Goldilocks," she said, eyeing the woman reproachfully. "I'm Mrs. Connor. You've been having an affair with my husband." The scathing woman looked at my mother disapprovingly, with a boot face through her long, false eyelashes, running her manicured fingers through her Marilyn Monroe hairstyle. "I'm not going to apologise for my relationship with your husband. It's clear he wants me, not you." My father had been standing there listening to his secretary's interaction with my mother. He turned around to his secretary and said, "You pack your bags now, young lady. Get out. I never want to see you again. No one speaks to my wife like that. And for the record, I never wanted you. Get out now, you floozy. And before you go looking for another job, might I suggest it be a good idea to buy some respectable clothes first?" Despite everything, my mother couldn't get rid of those tormenting, harrowing pictures of her husband spending time with Delilah, and their steamy love affair, as short-lived as it may have been. Her husband's brutal betrayal had hurt her to the core, which was why I was standing right now here with my brother Bobby, staring at the most sinister-looking guest house that you could ever envisage. Everything about the place was spectrally menacing. Even my mother looked aghast as the taxi driver helped us remove the suitcases from the back of the boot. None of us expected the guest house to look exactly like this. It was very stylized, old Baroque, a Georgian square brick building, 3 stories high, painted in white with symmetrical windows, pale blue shutters, a florid entrance embellished with a grand archway, supported by very grandiose, ornamental, ostentatious-looking columns. There was an elaborate front yard that had been perfectly manicured, with hedges pruned into animal shapes. There was a bear, a wolf, an eagle, a horse, a lion. It sounds stunning, I know, but there was a greyness that hung over the place, a bleak, oppressive blackness that I couldn't explain. Haunting is the only word that springs to my mind. To all intensive purposes, on the brochure it had looked fabulously appealing, but staring at it face to face in the cold, hard light of day, something didn't feel right about this extravagantly ornamental rococo house. Although beautiful, it felt treacherous, dangerous, as if the house itself was staring at us with uncongenial eyes that left a shiver descending down my spine. "I don't like it," I whispered to my mother. "It's creepy, really creepy, even though it is beautiful." "Don't be ridiculous, Kate. You're talking nonsense," said my mother, putting a resolute, determined smile on her face. "We're going to have a perfectly wonderful time here. I know we are." But I could see by her ambiguous expression she didn't look entirely convinced as she paid off the taxi driver. The 3 of us made our way hesitantly to the grand front door. It was flung open by a woman wearing a velvety burgundy Georgian dress, which was astonishing to all 3 of us. It was adorned with a triangular front piece, and covered in bountiful rattan underskirts. Her grey hair was tightly gathered behind her head, pinned back in a neat knot. Her face was so white it almost looked ghost-like. Her eyes were a piercing blue, as if she was looking right through us, which made us feel distinctly unsettled. "Welcome," said the woman to us. "Welcome to Paisley Terrace. I will show you both to your rooms. Breakfast is served at 7, lunch at midday, dinner at 8 every evening." My mother looked surprised. "Is this not Highfield Place? Are you not Alice?" No, my name's Miss Mariette. You're Mrs. Connor, is that not right?" "Well, I got your booking, so you're at the right guest house, I assure you." "Oh, that is a relief," said my mother. "I was wondering." We were led through a grand arched entrance hall, with highly decorative ornamental scrolled ceilings, fabulous light fittings, gleaming oakwood polished floors that were so breathtakingly shiny that you could see your reflection on the surfaces, that were adorned with a plethora of elaborate-looking Persian rugs. She guided us up a very embellished wrought-iron sweeping staircase, Me and my brother were to share an elegant room painted in Wedgwood blue, with a central fireplace, an ornate marble mantel that was surrounded by porcelain blue tiles. There were 2 curlicued 4-poster walnut beds, covered in blue and white flowery quilted bedding that reminded me of fleur-de-lis designs, and an ornate walnut dresser with 2 matching bedstands with Wedgwood blue lamps. There was also a rococo over-elaborate light fitting dangling from the ceiling, a showy display of imitation candles in delicate glass cups. My mother's room was much like ours, painted in a bright sage green colour. The walls were pompously arrayed in vintage-looking oil paintings of prominent people in Georgian dress, and lots of gilded gold mirrors hung liberally all over the house. "I'll leave you to get unpacked," said the woman. "What does she look like?" I said to my mother. "She looks like she's trapped in a time warp. Maybe she thinks it's charming to dress in keeping with the house. I think it's quite sweet, really." I raised a cynical brow. "I don't know, Mum, but something's not right about this place. It feels so weird." "I agree with Kate," said my brother Douglas, wrinkling up his nose in distaste. "This place is seriously off-kilter. Something doesn't feel right about it. Have you noticed how cold it is in here? It shouldn't be this cold in summer. It feels like a fridge in this place. It's not normal." "Maybe Georgian houses are cold," my mother suggested, opening the window in our room, glancing out at the magnificent views. "Look at those spectacular views, sweethearts," she said. "You have to admit it. Whatever you may say about the house, the views out there are sensational. Just think about the fun you 2 are going to have exploring those wood groves together. There's so many trees. Everything is so green. I imagine there must be a lot of wildlife around here. You're going to have so much fun. Speaking of fun, why don't you go exploring once you've unpacked?" And that is what we did. My mother was right. When we were away from the house and ambling around in the woods, it was easy to forget the oppressive, suffocating feeling of the house. The woods were exquisite, a true sanctuary, with mature, statuesque trees rising up into the sky like masterful skyscrapers, and the earthen floor covered in ferns and interesting-looking shrubs, while many of the branches were swathed in carpets of rich green velvety moss. That evening we ate a lavish dinner in the formal dining room. We discovered that even the guests staying at the house were attired in very flamboyant Georgian clothes, so we did feel that we stuck out like sore thumbs, wearing our casual jeans and sweaters which we wished we hadn't. Furthermore, I noticed we were receiving funny, snooty looks from the 2 formally attired male guests, sitting at the far end of the table. It was like they were more than a little perturbed and confounded by what I was wearing in particular, almost as if they couldn't fathom why I was wearing pants as I was a girl. I felt more than a little self-conscious. The men nodded to us politely, but never said a single word to us, but I listened to their conversations. All I can say is that these men did not speak like us at all. Their language and etiquette was flowery, as was their formal attire and appearance, with matching waistcoats, jackets and breeches, with brass buttons and Hessian boots. Not to mention the architecture of the home, which was equally as ornate. Perhaps everyone staying at this house was supposed to pretend to be Georgian, I thought. Were they all actors? Because if they were doing a dazzling performance. A very formal butler was wearing a black jacket, pants and a white shirt, served us a light chicken consommé for first course, which was then followed by a rabbit dish and a light sauce, accompanied by roasted potatoes and mixed vegetables. For dessert we were given peaches swathed in a raspberry sauce with clotted cream. It was delicious, but everything was served with the finest starched linen table napkins. Glasses sparkled and gleamed. The cutlery was ornate, in the finest silver. The table was lavishly adorned with huge silver candelabras and large arrangements of exquisite flowers. It was over the top in every sense of the word. That night, as me and my brother retired to bed, he reflected on the dinner we'd just had. "There's something very peculiar going on here, sis. Something's not right about this place. I feel as if we're caught in another time, as if we don't belong here. I promise you, it feels like those people are genuinely Georgian. They don't seem like actors to me. Did you see the way we were being looked at by everyone? Even the butler was giving us furtive sideways glances when we weren't looking. It was as if even they were conspicuously aware that we are out of place. When I was looking at my cell phone, those 2 men stopped eating. They gawked at me. It was as if they were saying, what the heck was I doing? They didn't have a clue what my cell phone was, or what I was doing with it. Furthermore, I notice I can't get a Wi-Fi signal here. When Mum asked the owner about a Wi-Fi connection, do you know what she said? No, what did she say? She said, we don't have anyone called Wi-Fi staying here, but if he does make a booking with us, she'll be sure to let us know. And she wanted to know what his surname was. You're kidding. She said that. Oh my word, that's super weird. Everybody knows about Wi-Fi. What did Mum say about it? Well, she was a bit bemused, but she told the lady not to worry. She thinks the woman might be very old-fashioned, eccentric, non-conventional, as the clothes she wears. Hasn't got a clue about modern technology. She says you do get people like that, caught up in the old ways. So it's safe to say that we have no Wi-Fi connection here then, I said, groaning. I wanted to get in contact with Dad. You bet there's no Wi-Fi connection here. Everything about this place creeps me out. It's not normal for a place in summer to feel like a fridge, he said, pulling the covers over himself to get warm. Good night, sis. Good night, I said. It must have been about midnight when I woke up with the most awful feeling that someone was staring at me. I looked up to see the owner of the house, the butler, the 2 guests who were staying at the house, clustering around my bed, and then a few other people joining the crowd to ogle me as well, very inappropriately. What the heck was going on, I wondered. I felt like a specimen at a zoo. I could feel eyes on me everywhere. It was haunting. I began to shiver nervously as I stared back at the gathering of people that surrounded my bed, not knowing what on earth to say. I could hear my brother audibly gasp. What do you want, madam? He said. I remember her eyes grew very cold. She said, You don't belong here. Go back. I felt an intense whirling sensation in my head. It went into a spin, as if I was on a roller coaster. After that, I remember nothing at all. But here is where the story gets remarkably interesting. I want to assure all your listeners that this rarely happened to us, as incongruous and outlandish as this may sound to you. I do have no explanation for this. If you doubt my story, I wouldn't blame you. If I was wearing your shoes, I would doubt my story too. But I assure you, everything happened as I am going to tell you now. The following morning I woke up in exactly the same Georgian house, but everything was remarkably different. The bed I was sleeping in was modern, covered in a white linen duvet cover. The bedroom had morphed into a modern contemporary design. The Wedgwood blue colour of the walls had dissipated. It was now white. And instead of ornate pictures on the wall, there were a couple of modern-looking David Hockney-style pictures. My brother sat up in his bed with an incredulous look on his face, as pleasing warm sunshine filtered into the room, as the icy coldness had been vanquished and swept away. He looked at me, rubbing his eyes and saying, What the heck happened? My mother burst into the room excitedly. You're never going to believe this, but everything here has changed. I went down to the breakfast room. The guests are all modern, wearing trendy clothes. The owner of the place, I've just spoken to her. She's not the same lady that was wearing the Victorian dress we saw yesterday. The most outlandish thing of all is she recognised me, asked me if I was enjoying my stay here. I asked her if this place was called Paisley Terrace. She said that this was an old guest house in the Georgian times, and it was called Paisley Terrace back then, but now it's called Highfield Place. Can you believe it, kids? Do you realise what I'm telling you? Something absolutely extraordinary has happened here, something miraculous. I think we entered a time warp yesterday. I'm not sure how it happened. We're back in our time now, but for some reason, we were in Georgian times yesterday. My mother was giggling, I think less out of amusement, but more out of complete awe and wonder over what had transpired. How was this even possible? But how can that be, Mum? I asked. I've no idea, but I promise you this, it's true. Otherwise, why have all the Georgian people that we met vanished? The whole house is completely different now. Even those funny-shaped hedges in the courtyard have all gone. There aren't even hedges there anymore. This is the strangest thing that has ever happened to me. But you know what is even more incredulous? We are booked into this place. The owner remembers us arriving yesterday. How is that even possible? Were there doubles of us? Could we have been in 2 places at one time? How does that even happen? How can we explain this? But I don't understand. How's that even possible? I gasped. I don't know, sweetheart, but it happened. I've heard of this thing occurring before. A couple went to a bar once. The people they met were strange. It felt as if they were in another time. They drove away, and when they returned to look for the place, it no longer existed. I'll tell you something, sweethearts. We're not the first this has happened to, nor will we be the last. My mother was, of course, absolutely right. When we went down to breakfast, the guests were modern in every way, wearing jeans and sweatshirts like we were, happily tapping into their cell phones, clearly enjoying their stay at the guest house that was warm, sunny and airy, with no oppressive, menacing feeling whatsoever. The owner of the guest house looked rather frantic. "I'm worried about Nicholas Presley. Has anyone here seen him? He hasn't slept in his bed last night. His car is still parked in the driveway. I remember after dinner last night clearly that he said he was going for a stroll in the woodgrove to work off his dinner. But I don't think he returned. I'm worried about him. Something must have happened to him. I think I should call the police at once." "There's no need for that, Alice," said one of the men, addressing our hostess cordially. "Before we panic, I think we could all go into the woodgrove and look for him. Maybe he had a fall or something." "All the more reason to call the police," said Alice, firmly reaching for the cell phone in the pocket of her jeans. "Wait a moment," said Peter, one of the guests who was staying at Highfield Place. "I think let's go looking for the man first before we start panicking and overreacting. He may have made his bed very briskly this morning, gone for a quick walk, chose to miss breakfast. Peter's right. He may have returned last night. He could have taken a morning hike and made his own bed. I don't think we should be panicking right now." It was formally decided that we would all split up into pairs in the woodgrove, which stretched over a vast, wide, sprawling area. My brother and I decided to go to the far left-hand side, which Alice firmly believed the man was less likely to have gone. The remainder of the group went exploring most of the well-marked hiking trails to look for Nicholas. By contrast, me and my brother were going where there were no trails. In truth, we just thought we were going to have a fabulously enjoyable amble in the forest. We had learnt there was a pretty babbling creek there. Although we feigned that we would look for the missing man, our primary focus was enjoying ourselves. We were still feeling somewhat unhinged about our otherworldly experience, as we couldn't fathom what had happened to us. I liked the more remote part of the woodgrove anyway. I didn't care that there were no distinct hiking trails here, as the trees were planted wide enough for us to make our way through the woods. And although there was a scattering of ferns and a plethora of fine moss that caressed many of the tree limbs, the earthen floor was very accessible to us. It was an awesomely beautiful day. The sun filtered through the canopy, bespeckling the grove in a soft ethereal light. We discerned a couple of woodpeckers with their distinct red heads tapping the bark of the trees. We also observed a dozen cedar waxwings, a hermit thrush and some warblers. It seemed we had bumped into a plethora of bird life. The woods were filled with their pretty chirping birdsong, trills, warbles and taps. My brother used a system of yellow ribbons on the trees, so we could find our way back very easily. It was a trick my father had taught us on previous camping trips. It had worked marvellously well for us, so we were never without our ribbons. The woodgrove was full of an abundance of different trees, from loblolly pines to red maples, sweet gums, hickories, oaks, cypress and Bradford pear trees. The trees were so graceful, mature, magnificent, as there are no words to describe the ambience of this forest. It was so magical. I would be almost open to believing in the stories of the fae, elves and goblins, as if they were true. It was so fairy tale-like. Finally we came across a pretty little enchanting babbling creek. We sat down on the hilly embankment, throwing stones into the water, completely forgetting about our mission to look for the missing man called Nicholas. All of a sudden we heard this drumming sound. There are no words to describe it to you, but it sounded outer-worldly, like someone was playing drums in the woodgrove. So we ran towards the sound, curious about what we might find. And this is when things got exceedingly bizarre. My sister and I saw a Bigfoot. Now we were in no doubt of what we were seeing, as over the years the subject of Bigfoot has gained much publicity. The creature was behaving very strangely. I'm glad to say it had not noticed us at all, but it was bending over this hedgerow and pulling at something. The creature was a giant in size, width and girth, covered in long flowing hair, but his appearance was much more in line with a hairy man than that of an ape. I think the only ape-like influences to his appearance were his overlong arms. The creature was built like a giant man, with the most gargantuan chest I've ever seen, along with the hugest shoulders. Imagine our amazement when we discovered he was pulling something up from the hedgerow with his arms. It was a man. Could this be the missing man, Nicholas Presley, whom everyone was looking for? We suspected as much. But the Bigfoot was guiding this man through the woods. We followed cautiously behind, hoping not to be observed or spotted by the creature. He then pointed towards the Georgian house. The man nodded at him and walked towards the house, while the Bigfoot moved away. But he quickly found us, cowering behind a tree, looking up at him with terrified eyes. The Bigfoot looked at us with a deep-set pair of dark eyes that were filled with kindness and sparkled with humour. It was like he was saying, "I knew you were there all along." And he did the most incredulous thing. He tapped me on the back in a gesture of friendliness, as if to give us an encouraging nudge. And then he glided away. I was nonplussed. Me and my brother cautiously made our way back to the guest house. Alice came running out of the front door. "Nicholas Presley! Where the heck have you been? We've been worried out of our minds about you. Everybody is out there doing a search for you." "If I tell you what happened to me, you're not going to believe it. I'm not sure I do myself. I'm still trying to get my head around things. I'm very confused." "Well, come inside, Nicholas. Have some coffee. I just need to call the others to let them know you've been found. Everybody's still searching for you in the woodgrove." Everybody was so delighted to hear that Nicholas was all right. They came hurriedly back to the house, delighted to see that Nicholas had returned and was safe and well, if not a little disorientated and rather confused. "We've been exceedingly worried about you, bro. We've been looking for you everywhere. We're so glad you're all right." "He said something weird happened to him in the woodgrove," said Alice. "We're all ears, Nicholas. Tell us what happened. You look flustered." "I'm not sure you're going to believe my story. In truth, I'm not sure I believe it myself. But I promise you it happened. But I have no way of explaining it to you." "Try us," said Alice. "I'm sure we've got open minds." "Well, you're going to need exceedingly big open minds for what I'm going to tell you. Even a complete paradigm shift. Last night I went into the woodgrove for an after-dinner walk. I thought I was going to take the usual walking trail. Then I decided to be a little bit more adventurous, to take the road less travelled, shall we say. Well, that wasn't a good idea. You could have easily got lost. The kids here went that way this morning looking for you, but they marked the trees with yellow ribbons so they didn't get lost. It's easy to get lost there. Well, I went for my usual walk, but when I returned to the guest house, it was all very different. For a start, the yard was different. There were bushes in front of the house, shaped into animals. There was a bear, there was a horse. It seemed rather menacing. When I opened the door and walked into the house, a strange woman stopped me in my tracks. She was wearing Georgian dress. She asked me who I was, what I was doing wandering around in her house. She told me her name was Mrs. Mariette. She didn't have me registered to stay there. I said, "Is this not Highfield?" She says no, that it was Paisley Terrace, that I wasn't the first person to get my wires crossed, thinking that the place was called Highfield, but no, it was called Paisley Terrace. Alice gasped. This place used to be called Paisley Terrace. It was a guest house in the Georgian times, as it is now. The woman who ran this place was called Mrs. Mariette. I've got some drawings. Hold on a second. She returned moments later with a few black and white drawings done of Paisley Terrace and Mrs. Mariette. "Is this whom you saw?" she asked Nicholas. Nicholas looked stunned. "That is her! Those hedges in front of the house, that's what they looked like." Everybody looked completely befuddled. "I've heard of things like this happening before," said Peter. "I think you got caught up in a glitch in time. Our world is not what we think it is. Time is not what we think it is. I've heard of people who claim to have travelled into the past. That clearly happened to you." "So what did Mrs. Mariette say to you?" asked Alice. "She told me to leave at once. I was not one of her listed guests. Everyone was staring at me, as if they thought I looked peculiarly strange, but they were the ones that looked weird to me, as they were all dressed in very lavish Georgian clothes. I thought I was going mad. I left the house, and that was when I encountered a Bigfoot. So things went from the incredulous to the exceedingly bizarre. I truly thought I was losing my mind, or my grip on reality. I was questioning my own sanity. You encountered a Bigfoot on top of this? That's right, I did. The creature was enormous. He looked at me. He spoke to me telepathically, indicated for me to follow him. He said to me, "You're in the wrong time. I'll take you back. Follow me." He was very scary and intimidating looking, but so nice to me that I instinctively followed him. I knew I could trust him. The next thing, I entered this place in the wood where everything began to whirl and spin. It was as if I was on a roller coaster with a loud drumming sound. It was like that. Then the Bigfoot reached out his arm and pulled me out of this hedgerow and indicated for me to follow him. And here I am back in our time. Now I ask you, how the heck did that happen? Your story is incredibly weird, but I'll tell you this, I have heard people can look at a Bigfoot and it will disappear in front of their eyes. They don't know where it's gone. Maybe they have the ability to slip through portals and glitches in our time. Who knows? I've never seen a Bigfoot myself, but we definitely have them around here because I've seen big footsteps by the creek. They couldn't belong to any other creature, so they have to be big footprints. So I know they're around here. Everything Nicholas is saying is true, I burst in. We also went into another time. Me and my brother witnessed Nicholas being pulled out of the hedgerow in the woodgrove. We saw the Bigfoot directing Nicholas safely back to this place, so he's not making any of this stuff up. Everybody looked bewildered. They couldn't believe that Nicholas's story was actually true. But me, my brother and mother knew that it was. We'd been back in time. We'd also witnessed the Bigfoot. To cut a long story short, me and my brother searched for the Bigfoot again, but we found him not. We were desirous to go back in time as well. We knew we would do things differently if we did. We would speak to the guests, ask our host about their lives. I only regret that we got a glimpse, as now I want so much more. But the chances of such an anomalous event happening to us again are as remote as winning the lottery for us. Needless to say, we had a fabulous time at the guest house, and on the very last day of our visit, my father's truck drove up the drive. He had a big beam on his face and the hugest bouquet of flowers for my mother. It was like watching a love story, as my mother and father ran into each other's arms and embraced. I think my mother wanted to be angry, but she couldn't help herself. She'd missed my dad dreadfully. "I've been a bloody fool, sweetheart. Will you forgive me? What the hell was the matter with me? I hate myself for what I did. I think I wanted my ego stroking, to have a young woman telling me that I still had the je ne sais quoi thing. But you're my world, sweetheart. If I lost you, I would lose my very heartbeat. I've missed you all so desperately much. Please forgive me."
"Please forgive him, Mum," I begged. "I know what he did was inexcusable, but Dad loves the bones of you. He made a stupid mistake. He won't ever do it again." My mother looked at my father adoringly, her eyes filling with tears. "Do you have any idea what you did to me, cheating on me with that girl? You made me feel like a flower that had wilted, lost her beauty, was no longer desirable. You made me feel worthless and insignificant, as if I was faded, old and unattractive, and you were replacing me for a younger, more vibrant model." My father took my mother's chin with his hands and drew her face up to his. "Now you listen to me, woman. You listen hard. You listen well. This was never about you. It was about me, my own insecurities, my ego, my need for validation. You are more beautiful than any woman I have ever known. Every year you grow more beautiful in my eyes. Nothing has faded in our relationship. Everything sparkles and shines and gleams. You are the jewel of my life. I love everything about you. That girl, there was nothing beautiful about her. Everything about her was fake. And that voice of hers, that voice, it was like a scratchy record. But why did you do it? Wasn't I enough? You're more than enough, my darling. You're everything. You're my world. You have my word that I will never do this again. Am I forgiven?" My mother melted into my father's arms. I knew that everything was going to be all right again,
but my father would have to be doing a lot of making up to her. We told our father our strange story, and dear listener, I wish I could understand what happened to us, why Bigfoot was connected to this time warp, or at least an understanding of what happened. But I will say one thing with crystal clear certainty. Our world is not what we think it is. I've recently done some research and have discovered people have claimed to go back in time on military projects. I don't believe they're lying about this, as I know what happened to us was very definitely real. So there you are. That's my story.
Dear Sarah, and all your lovely listeners. The year was 1982. It had been freezing cold earlier on in the day, chilling bone to marrow. As high up in the mountains at over 7,200 feet, it could get terribly cold, with bitter blue sky, crisp snapping winds. But later on in the day, the temperature would invariably change just as quickly. You could be abandoning your heavy coat for some cool summer clothes just as easily. It was something we had got used to living in Estes Park, north central Colorado, but I never ever wearied of it. It was like the weather was a grumpy old man with a contrary personality, drifting from an icy mood to more sober, then to cheerful and sunny disposition, when the thin shafts of crystal sunlight would sparkle across the valley in a glorious golden glaze. My mother was driving back with me from a shopping trip in Denver, 70 miles from Estes Park, on the long, curved asphalt road that hugged many of the cliffs of the tumultuous angular terrain, on the windy way back home, where some of the roads were like crooked fingers. I remember we'd been listening to Madonna's greatest hits. My mother loved Madonna, fancied herself as a little bit of a look-alike, with her chiselled cheekbones, inky blue eyes, straight nose, and very feminine jawline, along with her wide lips that were always painted with a bright red lipstick, not to mention her whiter-than-white porcelain fair skin. She even wore her bottle blonde hair in a Marilyn Monroe hairstyle. I was excited as my mother had spoilt me rotten on our shopping trip, as in our local town we didn't have the vast amount of shopping opportunities that you have in Denver, when we would paint the town red, buying lots of lovely clothes. She would always take me to the Milky Lane afterwards to have a double-thick chocolate milkshake, as shopping is thirsty business, I can assure you of that. On this occasion she brought me a fluffy pink coat. I simply loved it. It was like a fox coat, only it was fake. Every young girl's perfect dream. My mother was tapping the steering wheel with her perfectly pink long lacquered nails, singing in time to Madonna's voice, "It's a cool, cool summer," in her flashy pink sports car, while the gusts of winds blew back our hair. She hit the gas pedal, pressing her feet a little too enthusiastically on the accelerator, where moments later, as if on cue, we were pulled over by the police, with sirens blazing and flashing blue lights. What was it this time? I sighed, as the officer walked over to the car with a grim look on his face. My mother adjusted her large sunglasses and peered at the officer flirtatiously through thick black false eyelashes. "Hello, officer," she said, turning up the charm on her voice like the volume of your remote control, her musical voice lifting in a cheeky, flirtatious drawl. "Is there a problem, officer?" "Ma'am, you've been speeding." "Oh, I'm so sorry, officer," she said, purring gently. "I didn't mean to. Will you let me off just this once?"
"And who do we have here? Who is this lovely young lady?" asked the officer, peering in at me, giving me a bright, sunny smile.
"This is my daughter." "Hello, officer," I said.
"Hello, little girl. What's your name?"
"Hazel."
"Very nice name, Hazel. What do you think your husband would think of you driving so recklessly, ma'am? Especially with your daughter here in the front seat."
"The name's Rachel," said my mother. "For the record, officer, I'm divorced."
"I'll let you off just this once," said the officer, giving me a wink. "We'll let your mother off, shall we, Hazel?"
I nodded.
The officer scribbled his number on a piece of card, giving it to my mother. "Give me a call sometime, if you fancy a drink. And word of advice, don't speed again. It's not a very good idea."
"Oh, you're a darling, officer. We'll do so."
"The name is Angus."
"You're a darling, Angus," said my mother, blowing him an exaggerated kiss with fingers on lips that had the poor man flushing a bright pink colour. It was always like that with my mother, a tireless flirt who had a long stream of male admirers. I knew she'd never be phoning that officer. She had a very jealous boyfriend, Julian, whom I couldn't stand. He was so possessive over her and acted like he owned her, as if she was a prized Afghan hound, and anyone who looked her way, well, there'd be hell to pay. "We need to do a spot of shopping," said my mother, pulling into the parking lot at the local store, quickly grabbing a shopping basket. "I've not got anything in the house tonight." My mother was a dreadful cook. She always bought ready-cooked food or stuff that was simple to throw together. I think she was just really lazy. If she put her mind to it, she probably could turn up something halfway decent. It suited her to plead impoverishment when it came to her culinary prowess, so that she could be taken out to some really trendy restaurants in Denver by her long list of swooning admirers. As my mother was walking around the shop, studying the shelves wilfully, throwing spaghetti, tomato sauce, French bread and Parmesan cheese into the basket, with me trudging by her side, I witnessed a man affably waving at me. I felt very shy and immediately grabbed my mother's hands, pointing bashfully towards the man, with childish, diffident hand gestures. "He keeps looking at me, Mummy." "Creep," said my mother, shaking her mane of blonde curls furiously. He was a tall man, with large shoulders and a short neck, with a beard of white hair, and piercing blue eyes that were almost as cold as ice. "I don't like the look of him," she whispered to me. "Did you see the way he was leering at you? You're only 7, for goodness sake. I ask you what the world is coming to when grown men ogle a little kid like you. The man is a complete pervert." "What does ogle mean, Mummy?" "Never you mind," said my mother, grabbing me protectively, pushing me towards the till to pay for our purchases. She looked up nervously towards the man, who was eyeballing us. He was pretending to examine the baked beans, but despite his very best efforts, he wasn't pulling off a very convincing act. If he wanted to improve his game, some acting lessons wouldn't go amiss. "He's not fooling anyone," my mother muttered angrily. "He's still gawking at us. Can you believe it? It makes my blood boil like Mount Vesuvius." "Hello, Mrs. DuPont. How are you today?" asked Abby, the girl behind the counter, who always spoke in such an upbeat tone of voice. People often asked her if she had ever had a sad day in her entire life. She was always smiling. I thought that was pathetic, as everyone alive has been sad at some point in time. She was a dumpy, doughy-looking girl, with a full head of short curly black hair, and a bright smile so sunny she could melt ice. Living in a small town, you tend to know most of the people. Abby was just one of the biggest hearts in the community. Helpful, polite, attentive, very cheerful. The sort of person you'd want to hang around if you were down in the dumps. She'd lift your mood in a heartbeat. "Have you seen him before?" my mother whispered to Abby. "You see that rubberneck over there, with the white beard, the heartless blue eyes, pretending to look at the baked beans? Do you know who he is?" "Can't say I do, Mrs. DuPont. Why? Is he giving you the evil eye?" "It's not me I'm concerned about. He keeps looking at Hazel, with that hungry, carnivorous look. You know what I mean? His sort give me the heebie-jeebies." Abby nodded. "Some people are seriously sick, Mrs. DuPont." My mother grabbed the paper bags of shopping, hauling them quickly into the trunk. "Get into the car, Hazel. We're out of here pronto. Let's get moving," she said, putting her foot quickly on the gas pedal and backing the car out of the parking lot, with a flamboyant, rather sexy swerve. My mother always knew how to make grand entrances or exits, even if she was using an aluminium steel pink carcass to make an impression or achieve maximum effect. "Damn it," she said. "That bloody man is following us in his white truck. I can see it's him. Can you bloody believe it? What on earth is his problem?" she said, checking the man through her driver's mirror. The man trailed behind us, sticking to our pink backside like superglue. So my mother guilefully pulled over her swanky sports car to the side of the road, so that the man had absolutely no choice but to pass us by, which was a very good move on her part. "Hallelujah," she said. "The jerk has finally gone. That insidious man was following us. What the heck is his problem?" Our town is built on a large sprawling meadow. After our long day of shopping, I was itching to return home. I couldn't wait to model my brand new pink furry coat for my mother. Our rubber tyres crushed the pebbles down our short driveway, where we parked in the open carport, outside a very serene, dignified brown brick home, boasting wide expanses of glass, the that opened out onto magnificent views of our backyard. In the far distance you could see the undulating rolling blue mountains dappling the horizon, along with the viridescent mixed deciduous coniferous forest beyond our home, that was spread out over a vast distance where trees clustered together like old men, some crooked and twisted from years of brutal storms. Within those woods was a plethora of wildlife. It wasn't uncommon for us to see bears rummaging across our lawn, wreaking havoc on the seed trays that we put out for the birds, or finding a couple of raccoons ferreting around in our dustbin. And in season, like so many locals in our part of the world, we'd been privy to seeing elk giving birth to their young, sometimes even in our own backyard. As I expected, no sooner had we arrived home, I could see Julian's motorbike parked in our driveway. The man was attired in a black tight leather pair of pants, with his custom-made black jacket. He got off his bike, lifting his oversized helmet off his head. He was a slim man with long lanky legs, sleek black hair swept up in a funky hairstyle, a square jawline, and very muddy brown eyes that were deep-set and slitty, rather reminiscent of a bull terrier. I sighed. I hated it when my mother's boyfriend was around, as my mother flirted with him assiduously. I always had to relocate habitually to my bedroom to avoid becoming the embarrassing spare part. I was mindfully aware of the awkwardness of these expeditious romantic liaisons with my mother's amorous boyfriend, who had the explorative inquiring hands of an octopus that were wandering everywhere, as if my mother was a road map. "How's your day been, Rachel?" he asked, giving her a big soppy wet kiss on her lips. I turned around in disgust. I hated seeing this man get sedulously all touchy-feely with my mother. "Well, it was good, until we went to the store. Some weirdo was gawking at Hazel, in a very injudicious, inappropriate way. He had that awful look about him." "You're sure he wasn't looking at you?" said Julian, putting his arms around my mother. "Absolutely not. He was looking at Hazel." "If I'd seen him, I would have throttled him. The man must be seriously warped." "Mummy nearly got fined today," I piped, "but the policeman let her off. He gave her his card. He wants her to have drinks with him, doesn't he, Mummy?" Julian went green at the gills. "Does he now? Is this true, Rachel? Were you flirting with a copper?" "If needs must," said my mother, giving me a cheeky wink, while Julian had opened her handbag to uncover the card, which he wilfully shed into hundreds of pieces. See what I mean by jealous? I loved seeing the tension in his face when he got his feathers ruffled. He looked like a bull terrier that wanted to lash out. For some reason I liked turning up the heat, making the poor man sweat. The next morning 2 of the neighbours' kids joined me to play hide-and-seek with them, Janice and her brother Edward, whom I would play with regularly. They were very nice kids. We hung around together most of the time. During the course of our game I was hiding behind a tree, wearing my long white cotton socks framed by pretty frills, and a velvety pink dress. I was giggling. As I was saying, I was about 7 years old at the time. My long blonde hair was tied up in pigtails with pink ribbons. It appeared that silly old Edward, who loved to complicate things, was looking in all the difficult, obscure places to find me, leaving behind the more straightforward areas. He was battling to find me. I found that highly amusing. It made me laugh. I always believed hiding in the simple places was so much easier. That was when I saw the strange man that I'd seen in the supermarket for a second time. He was hiding behind the tree, surreptitiously moving towards me, his tall body crouched over to make himself less conspicuous, possibly less intimidating, and more approachable for me. I was surprised to see him. I knew my mother didn't like him at all. He put his fingers on his lips and went, "Shh, shh." He was creeping towards me, turning his full head of white hair to the left and right, furtively checking that no one else was around. He reminded me of my grandfather, with a white beard, penetrating, searing blue eyes. He spoke in a strange accent. "Hello, little girl. What is your name?" I put my finger in my mouth nervously, chewing my fingernails awkwardly. "My name's Hazel." "That's a very pretty name, Hazel, for a very pretty girl. My name is Stefan. I have a lovely present for you." He handed me a china doll. I gasped in astonishment. I'd always dreamed of a china doll. This was a beautiful doll with wide blue eyes,
long curly auburn hair, dressed in a pretty pink dress lined with lace, and on her china leg she was wearing lacy pantaloons. She was absolutely gorgeous. I'd never seen such a bedazzling doll before. I stared at it, with blue eyes growing wide with wondrous awe. "I'm friends with Father Christmas in the North Pole. Father Christmas says that Hazel has been a very good girl, that he wanted to send you a gift before Christmas. She is so very special, he says."
"Father Christmas told you to say that?" I asked excitedly. "Did he get the milk I left out for him last Christmas with the cinnamon cookies?"
"Oh, yes, he did. He told me it was absolutely delicious. It's thirsty work climbing down chimneys, I assure you, Hazel." I looked at the china doll he handed me.
"She's so pretty. I'm going to call her Claudia, like my teacher at school. My teacher at school's called Claudia. She's ever so nice. She's also got auburn hair."
"She's very pretty, like you, Hazel. But you must not tell anyone about this present. Other children will be very upset if they don't get one. You must not let your mummy see it. She might get very angry with Father Christmas for giving you an early present."
I nodded. The man mysteriously disappeared. I simply couldn't wait to show my friends my bedazzling china doll. Janice was exceedingly jealous. She looked like she was going to burst into tears any minute, as she felt left out. But Edward wrinkled up his nose in disgust and said, "It's a china doll, not very nice." "Where did you get it?" they both asked me. "I found it," I lied, "under that tree over there." I didn't want to betray Father Christmas' trust, after all. "Which tree?" asked Janice. "Help me look. Maybe we can find one for me as well." As you can imagine, I thought I was very special getting a china doll, until I found other friends my age had also been given china dolls randomly by a stranger. Katie Perkins told me that while she was playing on her bicycle outside her home, a man had stopped in his truck, called her over to his window. He had asked her what her name was. "It's Katie Perkins," she told him. "Oh," he had said, "I have a special delivery for Katie Perkins from the North Pole. Father Christmas forgot to deliver you this extra present last year. He apologizes profusely for the delay. I'm his helper. My name is Stefan." Katie had been so excited, she told me how special she felt about getting the china doll, as Father Christmas had singled her out for favour. I didn't tell her about mine, but I was beginning to feel significantly less special. Then my friend Gretchen Montague also received a china doll outside the school gate, when her mother was about to collect her from school. Once again it was given to her by a strange man called Stefan, with a similar story. I was beginning to think that Father Christmas was favouring everyone with china dolls. It really upset me greatly. I didn't feel quite so special any more. One day when I was playing in the yard, I saw Stefan again. He indicated for me to come over to him. This time he gave me a big bag of sweets, compliments of Father Christmas. I took them away happily from him. I thought nothing of it, only that Father Christmas had become very active in our lives, at times which were strange. Wasn't he supposed to be busy after all in the North Pole, preparing stockings for kids all over the world for Christmas? I hardly thought he'd have the time to give other kids presents during the summer. One day as my mother was cleaning out my bedroom, she stumbled across my china doll. "Who gave this to you?" she asked, looking surprised. "I don't remember anyone buying this for you." I flushed a bright pink colour. I wasn't good at lying to my mother. She looked at me stiffly. "I don't like it when you hesitate, Hazel. It means you're hiding something from me. You need to tell me right now. Who gave this to you?" she demanded. I trembled, my skin flushing. "The man you don't like. The one with the white beard." "Which man?" my mother asked me. "Who are you talking about, Hazel?" "The man we saw at the grocery shop, after we'd been shopping in Denver, when you were nearly fined by the policeman, the nice officer that gave you his phone number." My mother grabbed me, holding me tightly like a doll that she was afraid to let go of. I could feel her whole body trembling. She looked directly into my eyes with an earnest look. "This is very important, Hazel. I need you to listen to me, and listen to me hard. When did this man give you the doll?" "About a day after the trip to Denver. when I was playing hide and seek with the neighbours. He whispered to me. He told me not to tell anyone. The doll actually comes from Father Christmas in the North Pole. He helps Santa Claus. His name's Stefan." "Listen, Hazel," said my mother, grabbing me. "You know Mummy doesn't like the man with the white beard." I nodded. "I know, you told me you didn't like him." "Well, that's because he's not a nice man. He's not telling you the truth, Hazel. He's not Father Christmas's helper. Not at all. He's lying to you. He's not a good man. If you ever see him again, you mustn't go anywhere near him. Promise me that. You can't take anything from him. Do you understand?"
I nodded. "But he's given a china doll to my 2 other friends, Katie Perkins and Gretchen. They both told me they got a doll from Father Christmas as well." The next day my mother had invited the sheriff over to our home, along with the 2 mothers who had children that were given china dolls by the strange man called Stefan. My mother's account. I was terribly worried about Hazel having received a china doll from that creepy, duplicitous man that I'd seen at the grocery store that day. I'll never forget those icy blue eyes that were shark-like in their dispassion, but predatory at the same time, as they eyed my daughter with a lascivious look which was very scary for a mother of a 7-year-old girl. As a single mother, I couldn't keep my eye on my daughter 24/7. Living in a small mountain town with a congenial community where we're on friendly terms with our neighbours, it was absolutely terrifying to think that we might have a predator in our midst. The trouble is that we live close to the Rocky Mountain National Park. We're a gateway to a lot of tourists who stay often in our small town or in the town of Boulder. So we get people here from all parts of the world passing through. So a stranger could be posing as a tourist with a nefarious agenda. I couldn't believe that it was a coincidence that all 3 kids given the china dolls had blonde hair and blue eyes. Yes, you could say a friendly old man who likes cute little girls was just giving them china dolls. I don't buy that for a moment. What's wrong with that? Everything's wrong with that. You see, I've seen the man myself. I've observed his amorous demeanour. I consider myself a good judge of character. My maternal instincts were in overdrive. I instinctively sensed something was terribly wrong. Of course, I went to see the sheriff straight away. He agreed with me that something was seriously off. I was asked to give the police a description of the man, which was drawn up by a police artist, and the police informed me that they would be keeping an eye out for the dubious character, hoping that they would spot him any time soon. Ostensibly, both mothers whose kids had received china dolls were as panicked as me when they learnt the truth, when I told them all about the leering stranger that I'd seen at the store. In truth, they took the news really rather badly. They were terrified to even let their kids out of their sight, and Gretchen's mother insisted on schooling her child at home. I thought that was a little extreme, but then of course I had no idea what this terrible man called Stefan was actually capable of. Hazel's story again. It was a Tuesday night. I glanced out of the window to see a glistening full moon and clusters of silvery stars. I loved full moons as the night was so light at times like this. You could see in the dark more clearly. My mother had finished her relationship with her biker boyfriend Julian, so I was thrilled to have her undivided attention to myself. In truth, I think part of the reason she'd ended things with him was because she wanted to focus entirely on me. She was exceedingly worried about the man who had given me the china doll. It was consuming her life. She didn't believe for a moment that he could be trusted, so she had become exceedingly protective towards me. She'd even brought her own handgun to protect us, which was a big deal for my mother, as she loathed and despised guns of any sort. She believed the disadvantages of having a gun was that it could end up being used against you, but it was a risk that she was willing to take on my account. My mother sat on the bed, brushing my long mane of blonde hair, until it shone. "I love your hair," she said, nuzzling her nose against my locks appreciatively, as she took in a big whiff. "It smells exactly like that apple shampoo." She asked me to open my mouth so she could examine my teeth, to see if I'd brushed them correctly. And once she was fully satisfied, she checked my nails to make absolutely certain there was no dirt caught up behind them, as spending a plethora of time out of doors, playing in the dirt, dust and earth, meant my nails were inclined to get rather filthy. She opened a book and began to read it to me. I'm not sure what the story was about,
but I always enjoyed hearing my mother read, as her voice was as soothing and reassuring as the sound of the ocean waves crashing against the rock, or rain pelting down upon the roof. I closed my eyes. My eyelids grew heavy as I fought back a yawn. "A little more, Mummy," I begged, even though I'd lost the gist of the story. And like a boat sailing out at sea, I was drifting off to the world of my dreams. "Sorry, sweetheart, but it's beddy-byes now. You need to get some shut-eye," she said, kissing me tenderly on both cheeks and getting up to close the curtains. She glanced out of the windows. "Oh, it's a bright night tonight, isn't it? There's a full moon out there." I didn't hear her comments. I was fast asleep. My mother's account. I was awoken in the middle of the night to this unfamiliar rustling sound that grabbed my attention immediately, as it was a sound that was completely out of place to my ears. I wasn't certain what it was, so I swiftly put on my slippers, tiptoeing down our entrance hall very, very quietly. I could see a pulsing light coming from my daughter's bedroom. It was flickering on and off, like a torch, its beams sometimes dappling an area of my daughter's bedroom wall. There was a rank medical smell in the air, one I wasn't well acquainted with, that rather reminded me of hospitals. That was when I saw the shadowy dark silhouette of a man who was carrying my sleeping daughter in his arms. I couldn't believe it. It was all I could do not to scream at the top of my lungs, but I wisely held my tongue, for I didn't want this man to know that I'd seen him. There are no words to describe a mother's dismay when you're witnessing your own child's abduction, for the scene unfolding before my eyes seemed surreal. I thought for a moment that I had to be dreaming. A chill descended over my body, as a numbing coldness swept over me like a deep Antarctic freeze, while a thick foggy curtain of bitter nausea transcended at the back of my throat. I had to stop him, but I didn't have my gun with me. What was I to do? I began to physically panic, as my mind was whirling with a kaleidoscope of thoughts that I tried to grab, but they eluded me like a bird on the wind. I couldn't even think straight. I was as jumpy as a Springer Spaniel, as disorientated as a confused pigeon. I quickly tiptoed back to the bedroom to get my gun, my fingers trembling as I held the cold metal in my hand and felt the hefty weight of the gun. Was I really going to do this? I tiptoed along the passageway, following the flickering light of the torch. I could see the man had managed to prise open the back door, possibly using a skeleton key. I couldn't be sure. I now wished I'd stepped up security measures in my home, like Gretchen's wise mother had done, as buying a gun had not been enough. I didn't trust myself in being able to use it effectively, but I had no choice in the matter. I'd have to use it to get my daughter back from this man. I could not shilly-shally around by calling the police. That would be wasting time. I had absolutely no time to lose. Time was of the essence. It was vital. I needed to shoot this man, and shoot him now. I needed to do it quickly, with the benefit of not even being seen. I could see he was armed with a fierce revolver that was clasped in his hand, while he was still carrying my daughter. It made my gun look like a kiddie's toy. Shoot him, my mind was screaming. But he was carrying my daughter. What if I accidentally shot her by mistake? Or my bullet ricocheted? I wasn't even a good shot. I could see he was stumbling towards the woods, carrying my sleeping daughter in his arms, who looked completely drugged. I knew why he was accessing this route. He was taking cautious measures not to be seen. There was a hiking trail behind our home that led to a remote back road. He was covering his tracks to ensure he was not observed. It was cunning and very clever. I ran after him quietly in my white nightdress, with my slippers, trying to be as discreet as I possibly could. There was a gentle wind blowing, lifting my hair annoyingly into my eyes, while my nightdress blew backwards and forwards like a large white boat sail on a stormy, tempestuous sea. The mixed variety of trees, from Douglas firs to spruces, oaks and chokecherries, moved their limbs in the wind like angry fists hammering the night sky. The woodgrove seemed menacing. The normal sounds of the night had been confiscated by the hostile ambience that demanded that the cheerful sounds that bring us reassurance could not be played. So the crickets, frogs, and even the sounds of a distant coyote had been vanquished from this evening's scheduled chorus. The trees swaggered in the breeze like drunken sailors, while the soft beams of moonlight filtered through the forest canopy, something that I was ever grateful for, as it helped me to see where I was going. I ran up behind the stranger cautiously, my heart thundering in my ears, my eyes almost choking with tears. My heart felt as if it had been squeezed tightly by a powerful fist. I was so utterly filled with terror. I could barely breathe. I was going to have to shoot this man, but the idea of pulling the trigger terrified the life out of me. But I would do anything in the world to save my child, even if it meant shooting this man at point-blank range, burying him under the forest floor. I would do absolutely anything to save my kid. Anything, even if it was outside the law. This was self-defense, surely. That was when I suddenly saw the anomalous creature gliding through the trees, the likes of such that I've never seen before. She stopped for a moment as she saw me, noting the anguished expression upon my face. I'm in no doubt she could sense my terror. She seemed to have tuned in to my frequency, appeared to be on high alert, like a dog whose ears have pricked up to a strange sound. I had absolutely no idea who or what she was, but she looked at me with a vigilant, circumspect, deep-set pair of dark eyes that were razor-sharp and heedful like a centurion on duty. It was all I could do to point at the man running ahead of me with a desperate, pleading expression upon my face. In my mind, I was begging the creature to help me. If anyone could help me, it was her. She was powerful, big, lofty, majestic, courageous, very, very strong. About 8 foot tall, 700 pounds, built like an army tank. What more could I ask for to help me? The creature's body stiffened, her jaw tightened, as her dark, prudent eyes fixed on the man. She then glided towards him with the efficient speed and grace of a cheetah. The man turned around as he heard the ground thundering behind him, as the horrifying, discomposing sound of a deep, low, guttural growl filtered through the valley. The creature pulled back her lips until her growl turned into a pugnacious, bellicose roar. The man's eyes grew round with terror. His fingers started to twitch awkwardly. He tried to access the trigger of his gun. The intransigent creature pushed back the man. He rolled on his back with my daughter on top of him. She gently pushed my daughter to one side. Then she sat on the man, pressing her powerful buttocks upon his chest. She began bouncing on him like a deflating rubber beach ball. As ribs cracked, the air was expunged from his lungs. He groaned. Then it was over for him, as a few more heavy pounding bounces from this powerful creature was equivalent to a bulldozer running over him, or a very powerful pestle crushing spices in a mortar. He lay there on the ground, his life now extinct, while a white substance drooled down his chin. His eyes were glazed over like a dead fish. I recognized the man instantly. It was the man with the full white beard, who had been ogling my daughter at the grocery store. I ran hurriedly towards my daughter. She was fast asleep, wrapped up in a blanket. I noticed that there was a strange alcoholic stench on her breath. She had clearly been drugged. I looked up at the creature who ran to my side, examining my daughter's forehead with her hand, seemingly satisfied that my daughter was breathing, although she reacted adversely to the strange smell on my daughter's breath, with a rather bewildered look upon her face. For a moment she stood still. She looked at me through her deep-set dark eyes that were so kind and gentle. She pointed to my daughter, and then to herself, and lifted up her 2 fingers. "You have 2 of your own?" I said. The creature nodded. She looked very proud. I studied her for a moment. She was like a giant human being covered in long, flowing dark hair, but her face was incredibly feminine and human-like, her skin leathery, her cheekbones so pronounced you could cut glass on them, and her nose flat. I noticed her breasts were large and full. In that moment the 2 of us connected on a very deep spiritual level, as 2 mothers who truly understood how much we love our children. The creature picked up my daughter for me, as if she was as light as a feather, and seamlessly carried her towards my home. And I opened up the kitchen door and guided the creature into my daughter's bedroom, pointing to the bed. She placed my sleeping child in her bed, and I ran into her arms and gave her a hug. "Thank you," I said, my wet tears now dampening the creature's hair. I noticed she smelt deliciously of petrichor, the earth after it rains, one of my all-time favourite smells. I felt so tiny and fragile in her arms, like a china doll. The creature seemed surprised but pleased by my effusive display of gratitude. She patted my back tenderly. Finally she moved through the bedroom, ambling gracefully down the passageway with me following behind her.
She stopped for a moment to examine my large purple amethyst on the hallway table. She ran her hands over it with an expression of awe on her face, as if to say, "Oh my goodness, it's so beautiful." I didn't hesitate to hand it to her. It was a huge stone, but in her hands it looked quite small. The creature's face lit up with such joy. She let out a thrilled whoop, and then I watched her as she glided out of my kitchen through the backyard into the woodgrove, carrying the precious gem. I thought it was interesting how her eyes were in awe of a natural wonder of nature, and not any of the material stuff we tend to accumulate. I decided to let sleeping dogs lie. After all, what else could I do? I didn't know how on earth I would explain the dead body in the woods to the police, so I said nothing about it at all, as I wanted to protect the strange creature that had rescued my daughter from any kind of harm that I now know is a Bigfoot. The police contacted me, informing me that the foreign man whom had been grooming my daughter by giving her a china doll had been found dead in the woodgrove behind my property, having been trampled by a very powerful wild animal, possibly a bear. "You are very lucky, ma'am. I think he was planning to abduct your daughter last night. His truck was found on the remote dirt road. It was discovered that he was an Eastern European tourist who's been renting out a house in the area, and it was found that he had drawers in his home full of inappropriate obscene material concerning kids and hundreds of china dolls. Not a good man by any manner of means. I'm glad to tell you that my daughter has no recall of this event. I chose to keep my lips sealed about what really happened that night, and of course my unlikely meeting with a spectacular anomalous creature I now know to be a Bigfoot. So there you are. That's my story. Wow, what an incredible story.
Dear Sarah, and all your lovely listeners. I pressed down the accelerator, listening to some country music on the radio with Tim McGraw singing What Room Was the Holiday In, as I made my way quickly to my cleaning job. The mansion I was heading to was spectacular in every way. It was lavishly decorated with stunning contemporary furnishings throughout, along with modern artworks on the walls from the likes of such masters as Damien Hirst, Jeff Koons, and Gerard Richter. On the outside, the symmetrical house was a modern white square building, with the architectural influences that included sculptural ornamental accessories engaged in the brickwork, which sprinkled the place with a Georgian impression, but with a profound modern twist. I tapped in my entry code at the intercom system, at the ornate black wrought iron gates, full of fabulously elaborate swirls and leaf-like designs. It automatically opened for me. My car tires swished smoothly down the slick, well-appointed driveway towards the house. I backed my car. I switched off the engine, pulled up the handbrake, and listened to the rest of the song. Then I switched off my blaring radio and slammed my car door shut behind me. I retreated to my trunk, pulling out my cleaning basket, and I began to cross the well-appointed, rather grandiose yard, with its high infusions of white roses framed by hedges of lavender, along with a formal checkerboard display of alternating ornamental white stones, terracotta tiles, and a creeping ground cover, with clusters of miniature purple flowers. With my basket in my hands, I began to walk up the sandstone steps towards the mansion. I stopped dead in my tracks. I saw the young woman I worked for, Mrs. Spanarson, sitting on the top step outside the grandiose walnut front door. She was staring vacantly into space like a gog-eyed goldfish. She didn't even notice me as I neared my hesitant approach. She seemed so lost in a world of her own. I felt sure I would almost be intrusive, invading her space, but her demeanour prickled my antennae. I realised something was terribly wrong with her. My walking pace increased its urgency as I darted towards the young woman, who was dressed still in her flowering pyjamas, while her flattened blonde hair clung to her head in a messy, dishevelled heap. "Are you all right, Mrs. Spanarson?" I asked. "Are you all right?" The woman was behaving exceedingly weird, as if she was almost locked up in a trance-like state. I put down my basket quickly and sat down on the step next to the woman, looking at her through perturbed brown eyes. A feeling of alarm rose up in my belly like a high tide. "Mrs. Spanarson," I repeated, raising my voice, "are you all right?" There was still no response from the woman, so I shook her slightly. Then she seemed to jolt out of her stupor. "Mrs. Spanarson,"
I repeated. "Are you all right? Are you all right?" Suddenly the woman began to shake and tremble violently. "Paul," she gulped. "Paul! In the study." She couldn't say the words, for they eluded her like a hot air balloon blowing away in the wind. I quickly ran to the study, knocking urgently on the door. "Mr. Spanarson! Mr. Spanarson!" I called. "Are you there?" But there was no answer. I was met with a silence. I pushed open the door. It creaked open ominously. Then, sitting there in a slouched position, slumped over his desk in a pool of his own blood, was Mr. Spanarson. I could see the gun had fallen out of his fingers. There was a note scribbled on a white pad, spattered with droplets of blood, next to his deceased body, saying 3 words, "I'm sorry." I stood there for a moment, gulping the air like an oxygen-starved goldfish, trying to absorb the gravity of what had transpired. The office seemed eerily quiet, apart from the tick-tock of a grandfather clock against the wall. Everything seemed so surreal, as if I was wrestling with a dream state that I was failing to exit. The man had killed himself, but why? By all accounts, he was happily married to his wife, who was 15 years his junior. They lived together in this sumptuous, somewhat pretentious mansion, in a splendidly idyllic green leafy Seattle neighbourhood. What on earth would have induced him to do such a crazy, nonsensical, irrational thing, like taking his own life? Finally, in a delayed reaction, I came to my senses and called for help. The coroner arrived promptly on the scene, followed by the police. The police had a therapist or counsellor on duty that appeared to be calming down the very distressed Susan Spanarson, while I stood on ceremony, trying to answer the many questions that were being asked, many of which I didn't know the answers to, but I did my level best to appease the police. The officer investigating the death was thorough in every way, a man of few words, but with eyes as discerning as an eagle. He was discussing everything studiously with the coroner. "The body is still warm," the coroner said. "My guess is he blew his brains out an hour ago." "That's recent," said the officer, looking rather aghast. "The poor wife must have heard the bullet going off. We'll have to take her in for questioning, but she's a gibbering wreck at the moment. Do you think there's anything suspicious about this death?" "Obviously, we'll be doing the autopsy, but by my book it looks pretty clear-cut to me. It must have been a suicide. I don't see anything out of alignment here, but we'll see. You can never be too sure about anything. We have to go through all the procedures with a fine tooth comb." Before long, the body was taken on a gurney to the morgue, where a post-mortem would be performed to affirm that the manner of death was not suspicious. I knew the man had blown his brains out. Mrs. Spanarson would not be capable of even killing a fly. Even a rocket scientist could discern that she was genuinely distraught. "Will you be all right?" the policeman finally asked me. "Do you think you could stay with Mrs. Spanarson, or call someone to be with her, like a relative perhaps, or a very good friend? I can see that she's exceedingly fragile. She needs lots of emotional support right now." "I'll stay with her," I volunteered. The crime scene cleaners were only coming in the morning to clean up the mess. In my opinion, it couldn't wait. That was far too late. So I took the initiative to clean up the bloody mess myself, whether I was authorised to do so or not. I certainly didn't care about that. I sterilised the surfaces, found myself wiping and disinfecting the grisly stomach-churning stuff, using a plethora of hot water and bleach, along with other cleaning materials, as well as gloves and a mask. I found pieces of skull on the floor, as well as brain material, clots of congealed blood. It was a nasty job, but someone had to do it. I would leave the bags of waste, which included the gloves I was using, the cloths, and even the clothes I was wearing, for the clean-up team to collect in the morning. It would all be deemed biohazardous waste. I couldn't have Susan Spanarson entering her husband's office under any circumstances while it was in this deplorable state. As I was cleaning up, I noticed a white plastic basket filled with letters of final demands. I sifted through them. I ascertained that this wealthy couple were possibly poorer than I was. It was a sobering thought that hit me like an ice bucket of cold water over the head. The fully furnished designer house they were living in was rented out. Nothing inside the home actually belonged to them. All their credit cards were completely maxed out. I wondered if Susan Spanarson even knew about this. Did she know that her deluxe fashionable lifestyle was all based on a lie? In reality, everything they owned belonged to the bank. I was right. It certainly was a huge shock to Susan Spanarson to discover that not only did they not own the furnishings, but even the house itself was rented. In reality, the only things of hers were the clothes on her back. She was soon to discover that some of her flamboyant pieces of jewellery that she thought were real were just fabulous fakes. She'd asked me to stay at her house indefinitely, as she valued my friendship. Unfortunately, I had to be the one to break the horrifying news to Mrs. Spanarson. The landlord wanted her out by the 1st of the month and no later. Ostensibly, this posh, elegant, regal-looking home was like any other cheap rental property, probably no different, really. It was more than a little brutal in the inauspicious circumstances. Did you really have no idea you were living in a rented, fully furnished home that wasn't even yours? I asked her. She insisted I called her Susan. I had absolutely no idea. I know now why he killed himself. He couldn't stomach telling me that we were being thrown out of this mansion, a mansion I loved that wasn't even ours. Our whole lives were based on a sad misconception, a big lie. I didn't have a clue about it. I did love him, though, despite everything. What Susan didn't know was that her husband had been nursing an insidious secret. He was caught up in the web of a gambling addiction. He had dwindled away their vast fortune at a casino, unable to subsist on the humiliation of pleading poverty. When you have wealth, power, and status, falling from such a towering pedestal can be more than a little crushing. It would seem when you're trying to create the impression of success, like so many people attempt to achieve on social media platforms, posting up fabulously swanky pictures of themselves, to make all their adoring followers and fans feel positively inadequate. It's the gloss you want people to see, not the rot or the black rampant mould that is festering in the background. The decay is deceptively hidden, covered up, concealed, so behind the happy faces, expensive designer clothes, yachts, bottles of fizzing champagne, the picture may indeed be a lot less attractive, for if you get close enough, you might just see the putrefaction. That's why they go to great lengths and measures to conceal it from your eyes. For if you were to gleam a whisper of the truth on the wind, it might break them up so hard like a fragile, delicate piece of porcelain china. For somehow living with the pretence that their illusionary, delusional life is to be envied, it brings them a measure of self-esteem, to cling to rather like a lifeboat lost at sea. It helps elevate those flagging egos, brings solace and affirmations that will give them a sense of significance and self-worth that they so ravenously crave, when in reality they fail to realize that every soul on the planet is precious beyond price. Unfortunately, said Susan, I don't think my prideful, rather smug husband could have coped with a mediocre standard of living. He loved living a lavish lifestyle. All the time, I can't believe it, we were driving luxurious cars, living in a palatial mansion owned by the bank. My husband loved to maintain that aura of grandiosity, loftiness, eminence, stateliness, if you know what I mean. It inflated his persona. It authenticated him, gave him a sense of pomposity, a vaingloriousness, as underneath it all he possibly only had the self-esteem of a gnat. I hate to say it, but it's true. Everything in our lives was a masquerade. He loved people to be in awe of us, impressed by our status, you see. She said, looking at me earnestly. I'm going to be very honest with you, Nora. When you mix in high circles among the wealthy and aristocracy, or elite if you like, it's so important to bluff or give the impression of owning the world, even if you don't. I think they're guilty of all doing this, all of them, the whole lot of them. It's a craving they have, to be respected, honoured and admired, you see. I think I get it, I said, although I wasn't sure that I actually did. Trying to pretend to be something you're not, or falsely living above your means, was not something I could fully comprehend. What are you going to do, Susan, I asked. Where on earth are you going to live, once your landlord throws you out? I'm not exactly sure, said Susan. I've got no money, but I do have a genuine diamond necklace that I can sell, that my husband didn't get to make into costume jewellery, I'm glad to say. Maybe I can use the funds to start my own business, but I don't know what I would do. Maybe you'd like to come into business with me, Nora. We could start a cleaning company together. Please, please say yes, she asked me with begging eyes. I now have to be a working girl like you, no longer a lady of leisure. It's funny, I said. How do you feel about cleaning blood and guts up for a living, Susan? When I said this, I wasn't joking, not even for a single second. Do you think you could do it? The job that other people loathe doing. You see, after I cleaned up after your husband, the crime scene clean-up team arrived the following morning. They commented on the great job I'd done cleaning up after your husband. They told me that there is money to be made in this business, as no one wants to do it. So there's a gap in the market. We could buy a van and all the materials we need with your diamond necklace, and you're also welcome to move in with me. Susan looked agog. You mean clean up bodies of dead people? She asked, looking appalled. I mean, what kind of a job is that? I'm just being practical. It's a perfect opportunity to make money. But you have to have a stomach of iron to be able to do it. The question is, do you think you've got that kind of stomach? So in a nutshell, that was how two people came together in an unlikely union. The high society Susan Spanarson, the meagre little me, that had been making a living cleaning people's homes. We chose to become crime scene cleaners. We engaged in a training course. In our job, we were required to wear biohazard suits, face masks, respirators, multiple pairs of disposable gloves. When we first started to work as crime scene cleaners, we began to ask ourselves whether we were stark raving mad. I mean, this had to be the worst job in the entire world, didn't it? You never get used to the smell of decaying flesh. No one in their right mind gets used to a smell like that. It's a smell you can't forget. It can haunt your worst nightmares if you allow yourself to be tormented or haunted by what you've seen. Of course, doing a job shunned by most people means you see sights that might make your hair grow white overnight. I know that from personal experience, as within weeks after my first job, I noticed grey shoots in my hair. At 30, I am now totally grey, but my silvery locks do suit me. Then you see sights that you will never ever forget, like cleaning up after a double homicide, or even the body of an old lady that no one has seen for a very long time. It means our job can be clouded by a grievous sadness, but just like a surgeon having to deal with death on the operating table, you learn to disconnect from what you've seen. If you don't, it would easily destroy you, or eat you up alive. It may surprise you to learn that there are, of course, great big pluses to such an infelicious job of dealing with blood, guts and maggots. One of them is that you gain a true appreciation and wondrous awe of life. I know one mortician whom I'm personally rather well acquainted with, who shares my joyous cherishing of every single passing day. I've learnt one thing, that no matter how old we are, our lives are indeed a God-given gift that could so easily be snatched away from us at any moment. If there are any guarantees in life, one is the knowing that death comes after us all. From the moment we're born, we all face the same risk, irrespective of our age or gender. Death is non-discriminatory. It is not personal. It just is. Another benefit of my job is a reassurance that we can bring people who are suffering a grievous, very sad loss. It is amazing how some gentle, comforting words can graciously soothe, mollify, and perpetuate the most broken of hearts. For me personally, it's fulfilling being able to touch people's lives, who will wear their heart on their sleeves when they deal with a loss that is so personal to them. Sometimes in life you're led down an unlikely path, like we were, something that you never envisaged for your life. If someone were to have said to me back in my youth that I would clean up dead bodies for a living, I would have known that it had to be some kind of couth, unsavoury joke that I wouldn't have found amusing. It would never have been something I would willingly do. But all these years later, after industriously cleaning up after a suicide gunshot incident at my boss's house, who would have thought that the hands of fate would sweep Susan and me down this implausible path? We soon became firm friends. She no longer mixed in the circles of high society, for she was often shunned by most who had known her, as if in some way connecting with her would bring them down from their own preconceived pedestals. Maybe they were superstitious, that a touch of her bad luck might rub off on them, become contagious rather like a deadly disease. I had witnessed well-heeled people, upon seeing Susan quickly flagging down a taxi, going to extreme lengths to avoid any kind of interaction with her. But she didn't care. She described her new middle-class life spent with me as like a rebirth of sorts. I lived in a small semi-detached apartment in Seattle, which we shared together. Neither of us were hitched with any men. It was funny when you meet people in the bar, mention what you do for a living. They suddenly give you a wide berth, quite literally, wanting to run away as far from you as possible. For the subject of death is one we would sooner brush under the carpet and pretend is not there. I have 2 stories on my crime scene cleanouts that will be of great interest to your listeners. The first story begins when it was raining cats and dogs in Seattle, which is always very symbolic for me. It's like the earth is crying as rain pelting down on my windscreen is to me poignantly reminiscent of sorrowful tears. Me and Susan were on our way to visit a home where a young lady had been murdered by her ex-boyfriend, who had decided promptly that if he couldn't live with her, then he would blow her brains out, which is exactly what he'd done. He'd broken surreptitiously into the family house during the dead of night, taking great measures not to be heard. The family were obliviously unaware of his presence. No one had considered that the dilapidated relationship that had fallen so badly apart and had been precariously hanging by a shoestring was still of any value or significance to the young man. Indeed, his attitude towards his girlfriend had been so indifferent, which is what makes the story all the more extraordinary. By all accounts, on the surface, he didn't hold his girlfriend in such high regard, so it would seem that by appearances things can be a lot more deceptive. Purportedly, the relationship had been wilting away like a dying flower in a vase for far too long. The young girl in question had nipped things in the bud, decided to end things after 5 long years. It would appear he was agreeable to this decision. "We haven't been working out," she had told him. "You've been losing your temper a lot. We've been involved in petty squawks. We both want different things in life. I think we should end things, go our separate ways." It would seem he had agreed with his girlfriend so graciously. The relationship had ended amicably. No one knew that under this indifferent, nonchalant facade, he was concealing a spewing, bubbling volcano that was about to erupt, burst its banks of furious, frothing, molten lava. Earlier on in the evening, the young man had seen his ex-girlfriend enjoying a drink with a stranger in a bar. It was like all hell broke loose. The floodbanks of his jealousy crossed the threshold of tolerance, seeping into anger, with an aggravation that gathered momentum, like a gale-force wind. Now he was doing something completely insane, beyond the boundaries of what is reasonable, as jealousy, when seasoned with the salt of provocation, can run a deadly course. Before the young man could reflect on his tumultuous behaviour, before he could consider the repercussions of his impulsive reactions, he had crept into the family home, tiptoeing into the young woman's bedroom, placing the cold metal gun to her head, pulling back the trigger. If there is any relief to be gained from the story, that was that the young girl experienced no fear, for she was thankfully fast asleep, not aware of the intruder hovering over her bed like a predatory bird. The loud noise of the gunshot woke up the entire household. Frightened screams from both parents melted into the foundations of the home like candle wax. As they went dashing towards their daughter's bedroom, they fell down on their hands and knees as they realized their daughter was dead. It's a parent's worst nightmare. We were called to the scene to clean up the body. It was the next-door neighbour that led us into her bedroom, where we had to remove the mattress, seal it up, and clean up the entire room. "The parents are too devastated to see anyone," she told us. "They're staying at my home with me. A grief counsellor is taking care of them. It's a dreadful, dreadful thing. Would you believe it? It was the boyfriend. A moment of complete, utter madness. I gather he pinched his father's revolver. Acted completely out of character. He's a very nice lad by all accounts. Terrible business," she said, shaking her head sadly. "Such a lovely young woman. Only 25, with her whole life ahead of her. Now the boyfriend's been incarcerated. What a dreadful waste of 2 such precious young lives." We agreed with the kind lady wholeheartedly. She led us to the outside of the room, shuddering. "How do you people do what you do? The mind boggles. I'm certainly not going in there myself, but thank God for people like you, willing to clean up this kind of mess. May God bless you both." We were left to our own devices, cleaning up the horror scene, feeling the sad energy in the room. I picked up a photograph on the sideboard in a gilt frame, showing it to Susan. "Pretty girl," I said, showing her the picture of the girl smiling in the camera, with long dark hair and green-blue eyes. "It's weird," I said to Susan, "but I feel as if we're both being watched, but there's no one here with us." It was an airy, haunting feeling. It seemed like the young woman's bedroom had become unnaturally cold. We both shivered. I looked at Susan. She held my gaze, but no words were spoken between us. We both sensed we weren't alone. We finished the job, cleaned up, throwing away all the disposable biohazard waste material. We ended up having an enjoyable evening at home that night. Of course, we tried not to discuss what happened during the day, so we tuned into a comedy show on television, then dutifully retired to bed. Before long, I drifted into a deep sleep. I woke up with a start, shivering from the cold, as the temperature in my room had become like an Arctic icebox. I got the overwhelming sense that I wasn't alone, that someone was watching me. It sent nervous chills descending down my spine. Then I felt an icy cold hand touch me. I could actually feel the fingers. It was all I could do not to scream, but I was frozen in terror. That was when I saw the dead girl, whose remains we'd cleaned away earlier on in the day, standing there at the end of my bed in her nightdress, with an expression of bewilderment on her face. She looked at me with frightened eyes. I recognized her from her photograph, only her face was covered in blood on the side. Maybe she didn't realize she was dead, so that was what I decided to tell her. I said to her, "Christine, I don't know how to tell you this, but you're dead. Sadly, your ex-boyfriend killed you. Please find your peace. Please go to the light." The girl looked at her body, looked at me. She looked astonished, and then she just vanished. The room regained its warmth. I was to discover that Susan had an experience of her own. She had woken up to someone saying, "Help me," but when she looked around the room, she saw no one there. It was a haunting experience for her. Luckily, we never saw the girl again, so we hope that she finally found her peace. Another time we were called out to a property outside Seattle, where a woman had tragically been found by her daughter, having tripped over her shoelace, lying deceased at the bottom of the stairs. By all accounts, she'd hit the flagstone floor so terribly hard that she'd cracked open her skull. The coroner said that her death was instantaneous and immediate. She would have known nothing about it, which was certainly reassuring to hear. We were very surprised to find the property was in a rather remote area, far off the beaten track. We found ourselves on some cracked roads, where rambunctious weeds had pushed their tough roots through the asphalt that was now bespeckled with broken pieces of road and pebbles. On either side of the road were elevated hilly embankments, lined with tall statuesque trees in varying shades of viridescent greens. It was a high probability that we may have passed a couple of rural properties, but everything appeared to be surrounded by trees, still more trees, and even more, so you couldn't be sure of anything. We found our way to the pebbled road that snaked directly to the wooden cabin. A woman with grey hair was standing outside her truck, leaning against the metal carcass, staring vacantly into space with that shocked, rather bemused look on her face that we often encountered in the grieving process. We surmised that this must be the daughter of the woman that died. She looked desperately distressed, her eyes rimmed with bright pink marks, which suggested she'd been having a jolly good cry. She looked upon us as we climbed out of the truck, quickly wiping away her eyes with her sleeves, trying to look as stoic as possible. I was used to people being brave and courageous, but it really wasn't necessary. "I'm so glad you've come. There's quite a lot of mess, I'm afraid. The coroner's taken her body, but there are pieces left behind, you know." We nodded. "I'm so sorry for your loss, ma'am. Do you know how many times I've tried to teach my mother to tie up her laces? You know, even last week I showed her this site on YouTube, which teaches you to tie up your laces correctly so that they don't come undone, so you don't trip over them. My mother could be so bloody minded. She always thought she knew better. But I cannot tell you how many times she tripped over those laces of hers. I so worried that something like this would invariably happen. But a cracked skull, I never imagined that. Nor the mess that it would create. Oh, what a mess! She must have tripped over her laces, flung her head on the flagstone floor, cracked it open, like an ostrich egg. Can you imagine anything more horrific? I'm very sorry, ma'am. It certainly can't be easy for you finding her like that. There's no way to say this, but accidents do happen. You've been doing this business for a long time, have you not? She asked us. Do you think that our time is written, that we're meant to go when we go, even if our death is of a traumatic kind? Do you think it's possibly preordained, written in the stars? The woman looked at us for reassurance, as if somehow we had all the answers to life's questions. Well, there's a part of me that thinks that, ma'am. I do personally believe that there has to be a divine purpose behind everything. Otherwise, nothing would make any sense at all. It just would make me feel a lot better, said the woman, if I knew that there would be nothing that I could have done to change what happened to her, that despite everything, that she was meant to go when she did. Maybe she was, I said. You're nice, said the lady, very nice. In truth, I was expecting you to be both men. I'm pleasantly surprised you're a woman doing this job. Very pleasantly surprised. Look, I'm so sorry to prattle on about my mother like this, but she was a good woman. She had a heart of gold on her, lived out in nature. She was 75 years old, as fit as a fiddle. But I so warned her about those laces. I told her they would be the death of her. It seems I was right. Well, as I was saying, accidents do happen. It's a fact of life. It's tragic. I'm sorry. Well, it can't be helped, said the woman, blowing her nose loudly in a tissue that she pulled out from the pocket of her jacket. Just make your way through the front. The mess is at the bottom of the staircase, she told us. Are you sure you're going to be all right? I asked. I'll be fine. I'll leave it to you then. Just close the door behind you when you are finished. It's been so nice to meet you both. I just wish we could have met under brighter circumstances. Still, it can't be helped. We watched the lovely woman leave. She climbed into her truck, driving away. Our eyes drank in the prettiness of the cute little rustic wooden cabin, like a delicious, refreshing drink. It was nestled in the middle of a flowering meadow, like something you might see on Little House on the Prairie. Soft, gentle beams of sunlight infused the long grasses in an ethereal golden glaze. As it was still quite early in the morning, there was a dewy, moist freshness to the air that you could almost taste on the tip of your tongue. The little tight petals of the wild flowers slowly began to open their heads as their hungry petals lapped up the morning light, while pretty celestial butterflies darted over their budding heads. Then clusters of tall ponderosa pines stood up proud like slender giants, dressed in their pompous verdant regalia, with boughs of needles that swayed like little hands. In the furthest distance I could see the undulating shapes of the hills, bowing their great girths under the cobalt blue sky, in a solitary still worship. For a moment me and Susan were transfixed by the beguiling scenic views, the smell of fragrant flowers on the wind, the sound of pretty bird song. Then we jolted back to reality, remembering the less than glamorous job we had undertaken to do. We sighed warily as we opened the back of our trunk and began to dress in our biohazard gear. We entered the cabin. A sadness, of course, engulfed us as a bloody pool greeted our eyes at the bottom of the stairs. We bagged up a single trainer that was caked in blood. As we were bagging up our materials, suddenly we saw moving through the trees, gliding towards us, a Bigfoot. The critter's face bore an expression of deep concern as she moved boldly towards us, abandoning her reticence as an afterthought. For in her heightened level of anxiety, she clearly sensed that something was terribly wrong. She looked bewildered and nonplussed as she ran towards the house, barely acknowledging us in the process. She stood at the door. She whistled. I stood there with the bag in my hand, so uncertain of what I should do. I could hardly believe what I was seeing. The creature was behaving like she knew that something was intrinsically wrong. It was clear to me she must have had a friendship with the old woman. She turned around and looked at us. Her deep dark eyes were questioning and probing, as if she wanted to know what had happened to the old woman. I opened up the bag, pulled out the shoe that was covered in blood. Then I pointed to the house. The Bigfoot glided towards me. She took the shoe from my hands, her face a picture of such inexplicable grief. I'm sorry, I said. She died. It was like the creature knew exactly what I was saying. She let out an excruciating howl. She began to lament by beating her chest powerfully hard. She took the shoe in her hand so lovingly, holding it close to her chest. She looked at us with such a deep sadness. Then she glided away into the trees. We could hear her howling from the valley. Me and Susan looked at each other with baffled expressions on our faces. It was clear to us that this female Bigfoot had a deep friendship with the old woman. I never knew a Bigfoot was real, said Susan, gasping in astonishment. The one thing about this job is it never ceases to surprise me. The things that happen to us, the things that we learn. I mean, how big was that creature? Easily 8 foot tall, I said. Possibly 600 to 700 pounds. But it was so human-looking. The face! Didn't you think that face was human? I did, I agreed. Although the overlong arms, the long dark flowing hair, the cone-shaped head did have ape-like influences. After we cleaned up, I phoned up the daughter of the old woman that died. Obviously, I wasn't going to tell her about the Bigfoot we'd encountered, but I did say this. Wasn't it lonely for your mother living out there in such a remote cabin? Her daughter said to me, That's the funny thing. She told me she had a great friend there, that she was never alone, but I never met the friend. I'm not sure who she was talking about. I was in no doubt that the mysterious friend was certainly the Bigfoot we encountered. If there is any thought I would give to your listeners, it is to live your life to the fullest, to never believe someone has it better than you, because more likely than not, they don't. So there you are. That's my story.
Dear Sarah and all your lovely listeners, I was so excited about my online house swap. I loved the sound of the warm, generous American lady on the end of the telephone called Jenna Hudson. I was swapping our home in the Scottish Highlands with the congenial American couple, who had both converted a chapel into a home in an area close to Mount Rainier. We were engaging in the house swap at an unseasonable time of the year, but then why not? Me and my husband were desperate for a change. So what if it was in the middle of winter? It would still be fun, wouldn't it? I have to tell you, Skye, you're going to adore the chapel, Jenna informed me. It's fabulous with stained glass arch windows, old pews. We converted it into our dream home. It's very special to us. I do know how you British love a bit of history attached to your buildings. Well, our home just oodles history. It sounds absolutely delightful, I'd said. I am afraid our stone house is not as ornate as yours, but it is blissfully secluded, with lochs, mountains, a plethora of fabulously wild scenery. It's over 300 years old, so it oodles history as well. I think you and I are kindred spirits, she had joked. Your home in Scotland sounds just up my street. Me and my husband Walter have always appreciated anything historic. Many people might have thought it was nonsensical for us to go and stay in a chapel in the middle of winter. After all, don't most people go on holiday in summer or spring? Or if they do go on a winter holiday, it's much more likely to be a skiing holiday in Aspen or the Swiss Alps. This was the only time of the year my husband Lachlan and I really got off to make our escape. We were incredibly busy in the summer months, organising holidays for other people hiking in the Scottish Highlands. So it was during the winter months that our business became quiet. This was the quintessential opportunity for us to enjoy a holiday all of our own. I loved the idea of staying in a home that was converted into a chapel. I think I'd fantasized of living in a chapel with stained glass windows and pews, or converting an old church into a home. Now for a couple of weeks we were going to live this perfect dream. Well, so I thought. I'd learnt about this app online, where you could swap houses with strangers living in other countries. It was certainly an affordable way of seeing the world, at a reduced cost. It made perfect sense to us. As being Scottish, we do have a reputation for being rather thrifty. Nothing prepared me for how remote the old chapel would invariably be. Thank goodness for our GPS, or we would never have found our way to the haunting place. The one thing I never appreciated about America was the sheer size of it.
Granted, we have remote areas in Scotland, but everything in America was on a much larger scale. In my humble opinion, it made it a hell of a lot easier to get hopelessly lost. It didn't help that it was snowing fiercely, so that everything looked exactly the same, as a white world can easily conceal or obscure more distinguishing landmarks. Neither my husband nor I had anticipated being caught up in a dreadful, punneling, whipping, buffeting snowstorm, so robustly vigorous it almost swept us off the road. In our hired truck we took several sweeping, contorted turns in our all-weather tyres, but the slippery drive was very tumultuous. We were skidding all over the place. Finally we found ourselves travelling down a curved road that led to an iron farm gate, with the name Pilgrim's Chapel. That was it. I visibly breathed in a huge sigh of relief. My heart began pounding with excitement. Oh my God, we're here! I can hardly believe it! We drove down a driveway that snaked towards the chapel, that seemed so inconspicuous, obscure and slight against the vastly imposing elements, the mountainous valleys, the pyramid shapes of the trees, that were all swathed in a glistening white carpet of snow. Oh, there it is, I said, as we parked our truck under the canopy of a snow-covered carport. For a fleeting moment, me and my husband stared in bewilderment at the Gothic church building. Its dark roof swaddled in thick carpets of bright gleaming snow. Its arched, brightly coloured stained-glass windows, done in rich reds, blues, greens, golds, purples and yellows, twinkled in the effusive morning light. I had believed that staying in a chapel would be a romantic, almost shamanistic experience, but as I stared at the spectral, atmospheric place, it seemed menacing, spooky, airy even. Was it my imagination, I wondered? I couldn't decide exactly what it was, but it made my skin crawl. A creepy chill pulsated down my spine. I had the inexplicable feeling that we were both being watched. I had been going on and on for months about how wonderful it would be to stay in this quaint, enchanting little chapel that I'd found online. A miraculous discovery that I thought was genius of me. Now I wasn't quite so sure. I was a starry-eyed romantic at heart, so to have to admit that this place was not already meeting my expectations was something I would not willingly concede to. I couldn't bear to hear my husband say, "I told you so. You're always too idealistic, Skye." He was always telling me that. "No wonder your parents called you Skye," he would tease. "Your head is always in the clouds." He was probably right, but I was keeping that to myself. "Well, here we are," I said, putting on a cheerful note to my voice, trying to pretend that I was feeling upbeat, when I wasn't at all. Lachlan had turned off the engine. His grim facial expression wore a resigned, rather solemn demeanour, as he stared at the bleak, lugubrious, rather plutonian building, while the lambasting wind wailed outside, thrashing, knocking, punnelling the air, as sheets of snow were flung in long gusty streams across the ground. This was certainly some windstorm. It was clear that neither of us wanted to exit the warmth of the truck, to make our brave approach to the chapel. We both just sat there soaking up our surroundings like two reluctant sponges that would rather be anywhere else in the world than here right now. The unearthly chapel was surrounded by vast groves of ponderosa pines and Douglas fir trees, all dusted in white snow crystals. But under this feisty wind they swaggered like inebriated drunks, seemingly as sinister in their demeanour as the chapel itself. It was as if their needled boughs were hammering the wind in protest to our arrival, as if they too were whispering, "Go away! Go away! You're not welcome here." Finally, me and my husband gathered our courage and wits about us, along with a couple of our suitcases. We dashed quickly towards the chapel. The moment we opened the truck door, our bodies were greeted with the punnelling gusts of freezing air. It felt like our cheeks were being slapped, burned, almost anaesthetised by piercing cold hands. We trembled, shivering with the glacial conditions, while I wrapped my icy hands in a coat pocket to keep them warm. Lachlan looked for the chapel key. I began to jump up and down on the spot, trying desperately to keep warm. My teeth were chattering. I could barely even feel my own fingers, they were that numb. Our host had told us we'd find the key under the doormat. My husband finally found it. It was an enormous heavy key, the size of a human hand, decorated with fancy scrolls. He turned the key in the lock, and twisted the door handle. At first we met with some resistance, as the door refused to budge, as if something was blocking it on the other side, trying not to permit us entry. Finally my husband used his boot to kick the door. It creaked open, emitting an audible groaning sound. We found ourselves staring blankly at a dark wood-panelled entrance hall, with bronze hooks for hanging coats and floor racks for boots. We didn't take off our coats, but clutched our suitcases tightly in our hands, as if reluctant about whether we were going to stay here or not. I think we both secretly wanted to grab our things and flee, but it was far too late for that. We were here now. The cheerless entrance hall was tenebrous and gloomy. We fumbled around for a light switch but found nothing. We then opened the door at the end of the passage that blossomed into the original chapel, as there were arched stained glass windows everywhere. The chapel had been turned into open-plan living, as there was an L-shaped kitchen in the far right-hand corner that seamlessly folded into a sprawling living area with a huge crate where a fire had already been laid, with kindling, rolled-up paper and firewood. There were a couple of cosy, well-worn sofas next to the fire, several bespoke bookcases filled with books that lined one of the walls. Then there were some oakwood pews in the far corner of the room that faced a large flat-screen television set, probably for entertainment purposes. I noticed the original uneven flagstone floors were covered in some threadbare-looking carpets that had seen better days. I immediately went over to light the fire, as the place was so bitterly cold. I could see the vapour of my own breath before my face. "Ah, there, that's better," I said. "We certainly need a fire in here." I instantly felt warmer and brighter, as the flames crackled and spitted. Even the sheer sight of the fire brought a coziness to the room that had been absent before. We turned on the lights, but they seemed rather dim. Everything was bathed in a rather purposeful soft infusion, rather than a bright luminescent electric light. "I'll go and put our suitcases in the bedroom, shall I?" said Lachlan. "I imagine it must be through there," he said, pointing towards a couple of doors. One that had a staircase that led up to the bell tower. The other one led to an adjoining bedroom and bathroom, with a large wooden sleigh bed, 2 bedstands and a closet. It was all very simple, basic, really rather rudimentary. "Oh, there's the shopping I ordered," I said to my husband, pointing to the paper bags of shopping on the oakwood kitchen counter. There was a note attached. "Welcome to America and to our chapel home. Here are all the food items you ordered. Do enjoy your stay. Have a wonderful time. Much love, Jenna and Walter." "At least we won't starve," I said, sighing with relief, as there was no way I could envisage eating out or going shopping with the howling storm out there. "Frankly," I said, "I'm amazed we got here in one piece. There was a brief moment when I thought our truck was going to go flying over the edge of that ridge. It was touch and go for a moment." "It surely was," reflected Lachlan. "In truth, I did also wonder about whether we would have a catastrophic accident. The roads were so icy. I don't care what they say about these all-weather wheels, but our truck was skidding all over the place. The roads are so iced up." "Well, never you mind. We're here safe and sound now. At least we got here in one piece, having braved the gruesome elements. Let's face it, that's all that matters at the end of the day." "I'll put on the kettle for a cup of tea," I said, trying to maintain my positive attitude that was wearing thin very fast. There was something about this place that made me feel distinctly on edge, but I couldn't decide what it was. I had dreamed of staying in a place like this all my life, but now that I was standing here in the cold light of day, surveying our immediate surroundings, along with the stunningly exquisite stained-glass arched windows, and the fire of my blazing enthusiasm had significantly dimmed. My husband nodded. "A cup of tea would go down very well. I do fancy a brew. Anything to warm us up. This place is as cold as a morgue." "Oh, please don't say that. You're giving me the creeps. I don't want to be thinking about places like that. Not when we're supposed to be on holiday."
"I'm sorry, Skye, but I'm going to say it as it is. This place gives me the creeps," said my husband, shuddering. "Have you noticed it could do with a good old dusting? There are cobwebs everywhere. I don't understand why the place wasn't cleaned before our arrival. It is very odd." I nodded. "It is peculiar." "You know why I think the place wasn't dusted?" he reflected soberly. "Why?" "Because Jenna doesn't really live here at all."
"Well, why? Why would you say that? How could you possibly know?"
Think about it, sweetheart. This place doesn't have a lived-in feeling about it that suggests a couple lives here. It's kitted out for people to stay here for the standard weekend or a few days. I don't think that couple lives here at all. There would be more evidence, surely. Knick-knacks, magazines, odds and ends, rather like fridge magnets on the refrigerator and cards. But there's none of that stuff here. Nothing at all. Everything is basic, with your standard run-of-the-mill equipment. No personal touches to this home that even reflect the character of the owners. If you walk into our home, for example, you can see we love animals. There are signs of our love for animals everywhere, from the dog baskets to the portrait on our wall of Rufus with a bone in his mouth. Then there's our love for art, along with some of your watercolours you painted. But here, there's none of those personal touches. Nothing.
But she told me she lived here, I protested. Maybe they're minimalistic.
Or maybe she was being economical with the truth when she told you she lived here. Some of the dust is so thick you could practically write your name in it. It's not normal not to dust your house for months at a time. Besides, if you lived here full time, you would be disturbing that dust. My husband was silent for a moment. There's another thing about this place I discovered when I looked outside the bedroom window, when I was putting our suitcases down. I don't know how to tell you this, he said, pausing for a moment, as if he was wrestling with revealing something to me that potentially would really upset me. He began to run his hands backwards and forwards through his mane of dark hair, something he always did when he was stressed out or a little anxious. Seeing him behave like this made me all the more nervous. I began to tremble. My heart thundered in my chest. I instinctively sensed he had something bad to tell me. I wasn't sure I wanted to hear what he had to say. Ignorance was bliss. I was already not comfortable in this place. What was he going to tell me? I might as well hear it now, or I would be wondering what it was, and that would be more bothersome to me. "You're not going to like it one bit," my husband said, eyeing me warily through earnest eyes. "I don't care. Tell me. Don't leave me champing at the bit." "Well, there's a graveyard behind our bedroom." "There's a what?" I gasped. "There's a graveyard behind our bedroom." I stared at my husband as if he was speaking some strange foreign language that I couldn't comprehend. "You're joking. That can't be right. No one would have a graveyard in the back of their property, would they? That's crazy." "Not necessarily. It goes with the territory. You can't just go digging up graves when you buy a property, except in extreme circumstances. Given this is a chapel that was once a church, it stands to reason that there would be a graveyard here. Besides, I thought you found graveyards rather interesting." "I did find graveyards interesting, but that does not mean I want to be sleeping in one." Lachlan knew I'd had a bad experience in an old graveyard in Scotland once when I was 15 years old. The haunting experience had freaked me out. It was something that I'd never ever forgotten. The gruesome memory still haunted me to this very day. Every time I saw a grave, it would send cold shivers down my spine. You of all people should know, Lachlan, that outer-worldly, unearthly things happen in graveyards. I shuddered as the haunting, vexatious memories of myself as a young girl of 15 years old, visiting a graveyard in an old Scottish cemetery in the dead of night, came rushing back to me with a freshness and vivid recall, as if it had happened yesterday. This was an irksome memory that I'd willfully tried to expunge from my mind, but it would come bouncing back like the proverbial jack-in-the-box again and again and again. Sometimes I would wake up in a cold sweat, reliving the harrowing experience in a tauntingly graphically detailed nightmare. Like most of the 15-year-old girls in my year, we had loved stories about things that go bump in the night. Horror movies had always given us that spine-chilling, delightful, tingling thrill that we hankered after at such a young age. It had enthralled and intoxicated us, being driven to the end of our terror, like a derailed train hanging on the precipice of a cliff face. It was as blood-tingling for us as taking a ride on a roller coaster, possibly even more inspiriting. That disquieting night in Scotland had been the most terrifying night of our young lives. Of course, we'd lied to our parents, as 15-year-olds invariably do. We claimed that the 5 of us girls were going to an all-night sleepover with a friend, That was true. What no one knew was that my friend lived across the road from a large cemetery, which we intended to visit in the dead of night, in our tireless search for a hair-raising ghostly encounter. Be careful what you wish for it might just come true. I shivered as I recalled the chilling event. It must have been about 20 to 12 in the evening. We had cautiously slipped out of the back window of my friend Abby's bedroom, so as not to be heard by her strict draconian mother, who would have possibly done her nut if she'd discovered what we were up to. Well, that's an understatement, actually. She would have done more than her nut. She would have been totally incensed. But what she didn't know would never hurt her. Abby's mother, Mrs. McKeith, was the bossiest, most dominating and overbearing woman you could ever hope to meet, who was very religious and vehemently believed you didn't go tampering with things you didn't understand. That night all 5 of us girls carried torches in our hands, along with impassioned excitement in our hearts. We were snugly wrapped up in warm clothes, as it was a chilly night. I recall we were all wearing jeans, sweatshirts and thick anoraks. I had felt exhilarated being out in the fresh, crisp, breezy night like this. It had been dark, oppressive, even menacing, but that was the whole idea, wasn't it? We were seeking an adventurous thrill. I'd never forgotten that. Where were the stars and moon that night? They seemed vanquished from the sky. But as far as I was concerned, I didn't care. I wanted to be scared out of my skull. We all did, without exception. I was desirous to experience the same gripping thrill you acquired from those scary movies where you ate popcorn and drank soda pop at the cinema, and writhed in your seats in terror, screaming your lungs out or clutching each other in hair-raising scenes. What I was soon to realise is that reality and fiction are worlds apart. I'm afraid real fear is not so grippingly thrilling at all by any manner of means, not when you're caught up in its mist. The 5 of us girls exuberantly ambled over to the cemetery, with a vibrant skip in our step. We approached the vast iron black gates, surreptitiously pushing them open. They creaked. We giggled as we trudged down the asphalt road that meandered in straight lines around vast verdant manicured fields, bespeckled with gravestones in every shape and size, some so old they were crooked, bent over, dilapidated, swathed in moss and lichen, names worn away by time. "What do we do now?" asked my friend Esther, once we were in the graveyard. "How do we get the ghosts and ghoulies to come out?" she teased. At that we all giggled. 2 of my friends pulled out cigarettes from their pockets and started to smoke, while Abby pulled out some brandy she'd pinched from her father's cabinet and began to take a swig. "Anyone want some brandy?" she asked. I took a swig. The strong alcohol burned the back of my throat. We decided to walk around the graveyard to study the stones. We curiously read several of the stone inscriptions, then sat around a gravestone to talk in the way that young girls invariably do. It would seem the subject had veered off ghosts. Now we were discussing boys. I think we were feeling a wee bit disappointed, rather flat like sparkling champagne that had lost its fizz. Perhaps all these scary movies are overrated, I thought. Nothing really sinister happens in a graveyard after all. We'd hyped ourselves up for nothing. Still, it was fun to be out here in the middle of the night, doing something we knew we shouldn't. It always felt good to be defying the parents' rules. As like typical obstreperous teenagers, we were naturally rebellious, sometimes even mutinous when it came to our parents' rules, as we tested the water and pushed those quintessential boundaries. As we were standing over a gravestone, that was when we saw him. He looked exceedingly angry as he marched deliberately towards us, swinging his arms backwards and forwards defiantly. We sensed this must be the caretaker of the graveyard. He didn't look at all happy with us. On the contrary, he looked incandescent. His weathered, wrinkled face looked contorted, his cold eyes grim and hostile, his mouth twisted down in a large scowl. I could feel my heart thundering in my chest. I knew we were in big, big trouble. This was a privately owned cemetery. We were trespassing. "Bloody hell," said my friend Kirsty, stabbing out her cigarette quickly, as she saw the peaked man moving towards us at a hasty speed, his rapid movements displaying the level of his affronted rage. He appeared to be gnashing his teeth, he was so peeved. You could feel the pugnacious, bristly energy as he loomed ever closer towards us. "What are you girls doing here?" the cantankerous man ranted. "This is a private cemetery. I can see you're smoking and drinking. Do you have no respect for the dead?" I remember his dark, belligerent eyes were burning with indignation as he studied us vengefully. There was something off about him, but I couldn't fathom what it was. He was wearing a long black coat.
His acrid face was unusually white. "I'm sorry, sir," stammered Kirsty. "We'll get out of here. We were only having a bit of fun. We didn't mean any harm. We weren't being disrespectful. We really weren't, I promise."
"Only a bit of fun, young lady. Do you realise how much work it takes to keep this graveyard in tip-top shape and pristine condition?"
"I said we were sorry, sir," said Kirsten, stammering. "We'll go now. We're really sorry, sir." I'd been evading looking at the man's eyes in my shame and humiliation. It was so awful to be caught out like this. It hadn't occurred to me that there would be a caretaker on night duty. That prospect hadn't even dawned on us. That was when my eyes glanced at the man's feet. But he had none. His body ended at the end of his coat. What the heck was going on? The man that was standing here talking to us had no feet. But that was impossible. You couldn't stand with no feet. Nobody could. That was when it hit me like a brick to my head. This impassioned man that had approached us was an apparition. This realization turned my blood cold. I let out a shrill scream that startled my friends. With desperate hands, I pushed past them. I began running for my life, virtually galloping down the asphalt road. Did my friends not realize we were talking to a ghost? Kirsty apologized to the man for my absurd behavior, but amidst her apology, the man began to grow faint before her. Then he vanished, dematerializing before their eyes. My 4 friends began to scream. They, too, started to run behind me on the asphalt road, desperate to leave the cemetery, to get back home as quickly as they could. As I was running away, I felt a cold hand touching my back. It was so bitterly cold that it actually burnt me, almost as if I'd touched a hot iron with my bare hands. I screamed again. I do not even know how all 5 of us girls actually made it back to the house that night, as we all began fighting each other, wiggling through the bedroom as fast as we could, our hearts thundering through our chests, our breath almost faint. I remember we put the light on in the bedroom. Finally, Abby broke the awkward silence. "We just saw a ghost! Oh my God! We bloody saw a ghost! He actually spoke to us! I can't believe this happened! This really happened!" None of us could. It seemed so surreal. The next day I was to discover a dark handprint had been seared on my back like a burn. It took 2 weeks before it faded away and was gone. Needless to say, we found out who the man was we encountered. He was a caretaker for that graveyard in 1884. We found a portrait of him online. It sent chills down our spine. A week later, my friend's mother woke up to find the caretaker standing at the end of her bed. Like us, she thought he was real, that someone had broken into the house. He looked at her and said, "Stay away," and then he vanished before us. Of course, we knew that "stay away" was for us, but luckily my friend's mother never knew that. Needless to say, we never frequented that graveyard ever again, but we weren't the first to encounter the caretaker, nor would we be the last. I'm still convinced he haunts that graveyard, guarding the graves of the departed, scaring anyone off who chooses to vandalize or explore the yard, or anyone who dares to offend the dearly departed by smoking or drinking in that graveyard. Now that me and Lachlan were staying here in a chapel in the middle of a graveyard, I felt more than a little unhinged, as I knew ghosts were real. The last thing I wanted was to experience an unearthly encounter all over again. Meeting that contentious caretaker had been more than enough interaction with the paranormal to last a lifetime. "I'm sorry, I know you have a thing about graveyards," said Lachlan, "but I'm sure we'll be perfectly all right here. I've just looked at the weather report. It's not looking good. The snowfall in around this area has been very hectic. Parts of the interstate have been cut off. There's been reports of snowdrifts everywhere. They're advising people to stay indoors, not to travel. There's ice on many of the roads. There've been some serious accidents." "Oh dear," I sighed. "So we're more or less trapped. Whatever induced me to think that staying in a Gothic chapel in winter would be a good idea? I must have lost leave of my senses." "Never you mind. We're going to make the most of our time here. It's going to be fun, I promise you," said Lachlan, trying to sound reassuring. "But what about the graveyard?"
"Forget the graveyard. It's going to be fine. Just because you say you had a bad experience in a graveyard once does not mean it'll happen again. In my book, lightning doesn't strike in the same place twice."
"I hope you're right," I said, not looking terribly encouraged by my husband's reassuring words, but I did manage a wry smile. I'm glad to inform you that for the next couple of days they were very uneventful. I wasn't about to complain about that at all. I was exceedingly happy with the routine monotony. I hoped that things would stay as humdrum as possible. We were pretty much snowed in, as the weather was unrelenting in its disregard for our comfort, as the incessant snow continued to fall. The ravages of the panelling winds hammered and beat against the chapel, so that it rattled and almost shook like a boat out on a tempestuous, turbulent, unsettled sea. I didn't even want to brave the elements or go out of doors, for if I so much as opened the door, the wailing wind would literally throttle me with its hands, almost lifting me off my feet and blowing me away. It certainly didn't help that it was bitterly cold out there, searing bone to marrow, making the very idea of going outdoors about as appealing as eating a sheep's eyeballs. I know that in some cultures eating sheep's eyeballs are considered a delicacy, but most certainly not for me. In my eyes, they're absolutely revolting. Let's just say such weather is an acquired taste. It certainly wasn't for me. I was used to bad weather, living in Scotland, but this boisterous, raging storm was one of a kind, and it wasn't for the faint-hearted. So me and Lachlan made the most of reading books together. Thankfully, there was a vast selection of good fiction in the bookshelves, which was our saving grace. We were both prolific readers, so we curled up happily on the sofas by a crackling fire and made ourselves as comfortable as possible, eating hot meals, drinking copious amounts of hot beverages. So much for the chapel being a romantic place. It was anything but. It was so bitterly cold and oppressive, not what you'd expect from a place of God. I think all these beautiful stained glass windows, as lovely as they are, did not provide the same kind of protection against the elements like double glazing clearly would have done. It was on the third day when the windy weather had laconically subsided, taking a brief respite. It would seem the raging storm had a contrary mind all of its own. It wasn't intending on calming down its aggressive stance any time soon, but it appeared to be taking a moment's breather from the hammering, pounding air, rather like a celestial vacuum cleaner, as if the windy Hoover extension had been switched off at the mains, disabling its electric connection for a while. I was standing by the kitchen sink washing the dishes, my hands thoroughly enjoying the warmth of the soap suds, as I wiped the soaked dishes thoroughly clean with a scouring brush. Suddenly, as I was glancing out of the window, I saw a large, solid flash of black moving swiftly past me, looking in at me. Was I mistaken? I couldn't be sure. Had I actually seen that? Had I actually seen anything at all? Surely not. "I'm going out for a second," I told Lachlan, throwing the scouring brush back into the soapy water. I scurried hastily towards the entrance hall, quickly grabbing my anorak off the hook, throwing on my boots. "Are you sure that's a good idea, sweetheart?" I could hear my husband saying, but his words dissipated like the steam from a kettle, as I'd long since opened the door, courageously embracing the elements, as an icy, bracing chill numbed my skin. But at the very least the evanescent, spirited winds had been fugaciously abated, for the time being at least. Enough time, I hoped, to do a little investigating and exploring of my own, to appease a rather inquiring mind that was excitedly doing flip-flops in eager anticipation of my search. I was now outside, staring in awesome wonder at the smooth, untarnished, immaculate white wilderness before me, that was so transfixing in its breathtaking beauty. It was so pristine, only disturbed by this long trail of Herculean-sized cookie-cutter-like footprint depressions that had gouged out their vast shape in the snow. I gawked in astonishment as I studied them. I mean, who in the world has feet this large? Furthermore, who walks in the ice-cold snow in their bare feet? I could see pronounced toe mark indentations, which ruled out the possibility that the flash of black I'd seen only moments before in the kitchen was a bear. It most certainly was not. Bears do not have toes. I made a foot impression of my own next to the print. I was absolutely astonished to see how tiny my footprint seemed by contrast. I now knew unequivocally that I'd definitely seen something outside the kitchen window. But what it was, that was the baffling, mysterious question. Whatever it was, I knew it was profoundly real. I was exceedingly inquisitive. Fear was not even engaged in my thinking, not at all. On the contrary, I was absolutely fascinated, exceedingly intrigued by what I'd seen. I resolutely resolved to follow the footsteps. I wanted to see where they would lead. I was to realize whatever this thing was that I was following most certainly had monstrous 5-foot strides, so it must be titanic in its proportions. I mean, who in the world walks with such a large stride? No one I knew. The mysterious enigmatic footsteps led through a long line of Douglas fir trees, so I cautiously stepped up my speed as my feet treaded prudently through the thick snow, meandering judiciously through the trees. Their boughs were heavily draped by thick overlays of glistening snow. There in the woodgrove I could see a large igloo-like shelter, made out of clusters of timber, needled branches, green offshoots, bracken, pieces of hedgerow, briars, and hay, cemented skilfully together with heavy bricks of snow. It was built up masterfully against a rocky outcrop, so that it blended uniformly with the rocks. Indeed, it was so meticulously camouflaged by snow, so irreproachable, that I probably wouldn't have seen it at all, if the giveaway footsteps had not been so conspicuous. Whoever was living inside the igloo had made only one blunderous gaffe, and that was not brushing its footsteps away. If the creature, whatever it was, had surreptitiously covered its tracks, I would never ever have uncovered its hiding spot in a million years. Not a chance. That was how indefectibly concealed it was. Suffice to say, to be fair to the creature, this was a remote uninhabited part of the world. If the creature did think someone was staying in the chapel, if by any chance it might have seen me, it would possibly wisely conclude that no one would foolishly brave the elements like I had done, as most people would be a whole lot more sensible and circumspect than I was. But then I wasn't most people. By nature I was spontaneously impulsive, sometimes to my gross detriment. I hoped that this would not be the case in this situation. This was certainly not the kind of arbitrary storm you played around with for fun. It was reckless and unpredictable. I stood there for a moment, my eyes fixed on the shelter, wondering what I should do. I wanted to see what was inside that igloo, more than anything in the entire world. It was like I had an audacious itch I desperately needed to scratch. I was voraciously impatient to know what I'd seen, but also I had enough sense to know that whoever was occupying that shelter could potentially be dangerous. Let's just say I didn't think about that possibility too much, as it would have robbed me of the confidence to do what I did next. This was when I had a stroke of genius. Well, so I thought at the time, but on reflection I'm not so sure my actions were that sagacious. I decided I would throw something at the structure, to see if I could get the creature to come out. But I would hide in the shadows so that it would never see me. I mean, honestly, who on earth was I kidding? I can't believe the level of my naivety. But there you go, Rome wasn't built in a day. I rolled a substantial amount of snow up into a sizable ball, gingerly throwing it at the igloo. It hit the corner of the structure, making a loud crashing sound, as the snow dissipated, as it hit the edges of the igloo. I stood very still, my heart beating a little faster. I took a deep breath, peeking behind the trees like a mischievous school kid, waiting for some kind of reaction. But nothing happened. I tried again. Once again I rolled up the snow into a large snowball, hurling it vigorously, swinging my arms as hard as I could for maximum impact. Surely it would be a distinguishable sound, as the howling winds had stopped. Some of the snow broke apart. It went flying into the opening, making a violent banging sound as it hit the ground. Nothing was to prepare me for what I was to see next. In truth, I don't even know what I was expecting to see. I heard a distinctive rustling noise as something was shuffling around in that igloo. Then a dense, black, shadowy, solid form began to crawl out of the structure, on hands and knees, rising to its feet. I audibly gasped. What in God's name was this creature? I'd never seen anything like it before. It stood up proud and tall like a man, at about 8 foot 700 pounds. Its lofty, dense, burly silhouette was covered in long flowing hair, the colour of black coal, that was so pronounced against the white snow. The thing that captivated my scrutiny and hijacked my attention with an extreme sense of bewilderment was how human the face of this creature appeared to be, along with a human-shaped body, a pair of small pert breasts, human hands and feet, although the arms on the creature were overlong, and the head was a pyramid shape. I was dumbfounded by what I was perceiving. I just stared at this creature in wondrous awe, hoping that she would not see me hiding there behind the tree. I had, of course, underestimated the intelligence and cunning discernment of this creature. To my immense amazement, the creature's eyes spun around like a needle on a magnet, priming in on my exact location with a pinpoint accuracy. I tried to remain terribly still. My body began to tremble and wobble like a jelly. I think it was knowing that she'd seen me that sent the fear of God passing through my veins. My heart began to crash around in my chest like a gibbering idiot. Oh my God, she'd seen me, or at the very least she knew exactly where I was. I hadn't anticipated this. I knew the creature was exceedingly intimidating. I'd seen her. She was powerful, majestic, huge. If she became remotely violent towards me, I was as good as dead. Should I run? Should I stay very still? I couldn't decide what course of action to initiate. The creature seized that decision from me, as she graciously glided towards the tree where I was hiding. She stood yards away from me, her eyes looking into mine. For a long while we just stared at each other. I think she was trying to comprehend what the heck I was doing out in this weather. Suffice to say, there was nothing malicious or hostile about the creature, which did surprise me. On the contrary, her eyes were terribly kind, but they did register a deep concern. I realized she was exceedingly worried about me, being caught out in the storm. She was right. Suddenly the weather that had calmed down for a brief interlude while I'd ventured out of doors all but shifted, renewing its viciously hostile and fierce advance, as sheets of icy cold air began to blast against me. I turned around to move towards the chapel. I knew I'd better be getting back, or I would be caught up in this feisty storm that was gathering wind speed at a rapid impetus. The creature stood very still, watching me, but she could see I was struggling. I've never known howling gale-force winds like this before. They beat against me like a boxer's pounding fist so rigorously that I fell backwards onto the ground, clambering furiously back onto my hands and feet, as if wrestling with an invisible man. I was being thrust backwards by forceful commanding hands that barricaded my path back to the house. What the hell did I think I was doing embracing the elements like this? Did I have a death wish or something? I was absolutely freezing. The wind was blowing up streams of icy debris across the escarpment, like a rambunctious, deadly sandstorm. The cold was biting, my body aching, while the fingers on my hands were frigid and stiff in my gloves. My eyes barely able to see, as the whistling wind blasted icy particles into them, so that they began to water profusely. I turned around to see the creature still standing there, her body solid and firm like a powerful sakura tree, unmoved, unstirred, unaffected by the cruel weather, with her well-grounded, powerful legs rooted securely to the earth by the foundations of her brute strength. She was watching me in bewilderment. There was a flicker of uncertainty in her deep-set dark eyes, as if she was pondering whether she should help me or not. Then she was there at my side. I could feel her breath on my face. She looked directly into my eyes. I heard the words in my head, "Let me help you." The next thing I knew was she lifted me into her overlong arms, carrying me directly towards the chapel like a baby. She was so powerfully strong that she moved like the wind, and wasn't held back in any way. I could feel the rise and fall of her heartbeat as my head was cradled against her chest. Finally she put me down outside the door. Then she stood still as though waiting. I looked at her and said, "Thank you." The creature watched me open the door, then, satisfied that I was safe inside the chapel, glided away, looking back only once to give me a brief congenial nod. It was only when I returned to Scotland after doing some intense research that I discovered the kind creature that had helped me was known as a Bigfoot or a Sasquatch. I quickly dashed into the chapel. My husband by now was fast asleep by the fire, with an Agatha Christie book clasped in his hands. He looked up at me as I stared at him, with a transfixed expression on my face. "What the heck is wrong with you?" asked Lachlan. "You look like you've swallowed a goldfish." "I may well have done," I said. "You'll never believe what happened to me out there. A strange, hairy creature carried me back to the house, as the storm was so fearsome. She was so nice, covered in hair. She looked human." Lachlan looked at me as if he thought I'd lost my mind, so I decided to quit while I was ahead. How could I possibly explain something so anomalous like this? If I couldn't make sense of what I'd encountered, how could he? It would be like saying, "Oh, by the way, I've just encountered a fairy." My story would seem nonsensical and outer-worldly to him. "What are you talking about? What did you say you saw?" "Oh, it was nothing," I said. "I must have seen a bear," I lied. Of course, I wish my story about staying at the chapel would end there, but it didn't. It was on the 4th night of our stay that I woke up with an inauspicious, portentous feeling that I wasn't alone. I felt as if something was watching me while I lay in my bed, but there was nothing there. I told myself I was going stark raving mad. My heart thumped in my chest, but I managed to calm myself down. I pulled the duvet cover over my head, trying desperately to sleep, but my eyes remained wide open. Maybe I should have woken Lachlan up, I thought, but then if I woke him up, he'd think I was losing my mind, so I decided better against it. Besides, he was notoriously grumpy if I woke him up prematurely. Telling him that I thought we weren't alone in my bedroom would likely facilitate a petty squabble between us, where I would be informed that my imagination was overactive. How I managed to drift off to sleep I don't know, but I did. Then I felt someone nudging me, as if they were tapping me. They kept calling my name. It sounded like a woman's voice. Sky! 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 I woke up with a start, but when I looked around the bedroom there was no one there. That was when I saw an indentation form at the end of my bed. I screamed. Lachlan woke up. "What the hell is wrong with you? Why are you screaming?"
"There's someone in here," I trembled, pointing towards the end of my bed, my eyes round with terror. "Lachlan, I promise you it was a woman's voice. She called my name. Look, there's an indentation at the end of my bed. Can't you see it? I promise you she was sitting over there. The duvet was straight before. Now there's a definite imprint. It happened before my eyes, Lachlan. I promise you I'm not making this up." Lachlan rolled his eyes in frustration, as if he didn't believe a word I was saying. "You're very impressionable, Sky. I'm sure it's nothing. You're just imagining things. Ever since you learnt about the graveyard behind us, you've allowed your mind to play tricks on you." Lachlan could say what he liked, but I knew what I'd seen. It freaked me out. I do not know how I managed to fall asleep, but I did. Lachlan's account. From the very beginning, I wasn't exactly thrilled to be going to stay in a chapel. I was eager to visit America, of course I was, but I never envisaged my first taste of this grand, remarkable, illustrious country would be staying in a Gothic chapel of all things. I mean, who does that? Isn't that an absurd choice of accommodation? But my wife has always been unorthodox. I knew me and my wife needed a break, so when she became excited about this house swap online, I didn't want to disappoint her by erring on the side of caution, which I wish I had. Sky has always been impulsive, a hopeless utopian romantic. For her, the idea of staying in a chapel with stained-glass windows and a bell tower titillated all her fancies and dreams. I mean, who was I to rob her of this whimsical, enchanting ambition of hers? So I decided to go along with the preposterous, rather loopy idea. Isn't that what husbands do to appease their wives? Sometimes make less than desirable sacrifices on their accounts, or to keep the peace. After all, don't they say happy wife, happy life? I've always embraced that theory. It's worked in my marriage. What I never knew was that we would end up pretty much snowed in when we arrived at our destination, facing the most dreadful, harrowing storming conditions, where we would hear the wind howling outside the chapel for days at a time, as everything rattled and shook precariously. Worse still, we were staying at a place that sent a chill down my spine. It was unnaturally cold all the time. I always had the impression we were being watched. I don't know how to describe it to you, but the place had a baleful, foreboding ambience. Of course, I didn't want to show Sky I had my reservations, as it would have spoilt the mood of our holiday. I did tell her I found the place rather sinister. Needless to say, I decided to adopt a positive, upbeat attitude about our stay. There was no point in becoming woebegone or disillusioned. We had to make the most of a bad situation. Ostensibly, when I discovered that there was a graveyard in the backyard, it certainly didn't ingratiate me towards the place. I didn't want to tell Sky about my macabre discovery, as I knew such a revelation to her would go down like a lead balloon, but I had to tell her. I could see her blue eyes fill with fear. Sky had a ghostly encounter when she was 15 years old in a cemetery in Scotland. If she had the slightest inkling that there were gravestones around this chapel, wild horses could not have dragged her to stay in this place. It was a hostile place, as if something or someone didn't want us here. Sometimes a place can give off that menacing ambience that instinctively warns you that something's not quite right. Then there was the curious question of the house dust and cobwebs. I certainly didn't get the impression that this house had been lived in for quite a while.
I believe our hosts had been more than a little economical with the truth. As to why that was the case, I wasn't entirely sure. It was on night 4 when my wife woke up screaming. She was totally convinced that there was someone in the bedroom with us. She said she'd heard a disembodied woman's voice whisper out her name. She pointed to the area of her bed, where there was a deep indentation on the mattress. What I didn't tell my wife was that a woman had also whispered my name in my ear, but this was on night 3, so I was fully aware that we weren't alone in this chapel. I just hoped that the ghost, whoever she was, would leave us alone. But I made a classic mistake. I told my wife that there were no such thing as ghosts, that once the dead were dead, they were truly gone. I told her that the dead could not interact with the living, and that the hollow indentation at the end of her bed was possibly made by us. Of course, my wife knew I was talking through my backside. She knew from personal experience that a person can indeed interact with a ghost, as it had happened to her with 4 of her friends back in Scotland. What I didn't realise was that I'd inadvertently almost challenged the ghost to interact with us. I was saying, "You're not real. You don't even exist." Believe me, that was a monumental mistake on my part. So things got very interesting for us on night 5, when the female apparition was determined to make herself known, so that her presence in the chapel could not be denied or disregarded any more. "I'm so scared," my wife said to me when we retired to bed that evening. "I'm scared that ghostly woman will come back." "Don't be ridiculous. She doesn't exist, Skye. She's not real." "I think she comes from the graveyard in the back," my wife persisted. "I don't even think. I know it. But why is she bothering us? What does she want? I mean, the caretaker at the cemetery in Scotland believed he was taking care of the cemetery in death. But what does this woman want with us? Why was she calling my name last night? That's what I want to know. What does she want with me?" "Calm down, Skye. You had a bad experience in a cemetery once. You're allowing your personal demons to torment you." "I wish we could leave this place," she said, shuddering. "When is this bloody storm going to stop? Then we can book into a hotel or something. This place gives me the creeps. I feel as if we're being watched all the time. Worse than that, I feel as if we're being scrutinized. I feel that whoever is watching us doesn't want us here." "You're just letting your imagination run away with you, Skye." "Well, I'm sorry, Lachlan, but I'm going to sleep with my bedside light on tonight. I'm not going to sleep in the dark. I refuse to." "Be my guest," I said, throwing the covers over my head. "Now let's get some sleep." We could hear the wind outside battering the chapel. Everything rattled and shook. But eventually I fell into a deep sleep, as over the last few days we had acclimatized to the noise. I was awoken to hear my name being whispered. "Lachlan, Lachlan," came a woman's voice, but I ignored it. I stayed still, squeezing my eyelids tightly, while my heart thumped loudly in my chest. Even my palms began to sweat. That was when I felt something nudging me. I thought it was my wife, so I sat up. "What is it, Skye?" I groaned. And that was when I saw a grey swirling mist circulating at the end of my bed, beginning to take shape. At first it became like a black shadow that thickened, became foggy and dense. Then it was as if details began to develop on the shadow, until it morphed into a grotesquely ugly woman in a black dress, standing at the edge of my bed, staring down at me through vacuous eyes. She gave me a provocative, toothless grin, very vindictive. I sensed she wanted to show me that she was there and that she was real. I gasped, then she dematerialized before my eyes, but I nearly jumped out of my skin when I physically heard the clip-clop of her shoes walking to the side of my bed. I could sense she had stopped yards away from me. I could hear and feel her presence. Now I began to breathe very fast. I felt her standing next to me, but I saw nothing there. Then I heard her voice screaming in my ear, "Get out! Get out! Get out now!" I could see my wife's bedside lamp was off, as there had been a power cut, but now it began to flicker on and off simultaneously. "Skye! Skye! Wake up!" "What's the matter?" she asked, studying me curiously. "You look as if you've seen a ghost. Don't tell me you have. Your face is as white as a sheet. You're trembling. What's wrong?" I was hardly going to tell my wife I'd seen a ghost. That would only affirm her worst fears, give her cause to overreact. One thing I certainly knew was I wanted to get going, to leave this place. I didn't know what this ghost was capable of doing. I didn't want to stand around and find out. I no longer cared about the storm out there.
It seemed so much less worse than what was inside the chapel. I wanted out of this place as fast as possible, and there was no time like the present. "We're leaving now," I said. "Grab all your stuff. We're going." "But why?" gasped my wife. "What about the storm? It's so dangerous out there. You heard what they were saying on the radio. Some of the roads are still not safe. Why all the sudden change of mind?" "I don't give a stuff about the storm. Get your stuff. We're going now." Jenna Hudson's account. I'm not going to lie. What's the point in doing that? Of course, I had been lying online to Skye McNally. I told her we lived in a chapel near Mount Rainier. We did. But it wasn't entirely true, as we no longer physically lived there. But I thought it would be best to be economical with the truth. If I told Skye why I wasn't living in the chapel any more with my husband, then she would be unlikely to engage in the house swap with us. I didn't want that to happen. It was a dream of mine to go to Scotland. I'd been told it was one of the most beautiful countries in the world to visit. When Skye told me about her idyllic whimsical stone cottage in the Scottish Highlands, I just knew I wanted to stay there, so it was a no-brainer for me. I couldn't resist. I knew Scotland was the land of castles and lochs, Scottish myths, legends and fables. If there was any place in the entire world where you were likely to encounter a haunting, it would be a country like Scotland, surely. So maybe, just maybe, the couple had encountered a ghost at one stage. I didn't want to tell them there was a ghost at the chapel, of an angry woman, a woman who didn't want us there, a woman who would throw a hissy fit if anyone stayed at the chapel. That was the real reason me and my husband Walter had abandoned the place. We were now living in Seattle with Walter's parents, getting under their skin. So the idea of a tour escape in Scotland became infinitely more appealing to us, even if it was during an unseasonable time of the year. When I told Skye McNally we were kindred spirits, I wasn't lying either. I'd also been excited when the chapel near Mount Rainier came on the market. It was my idea to convert it into a home that practically oozed an illustrious history. Of course, my husband thought it was an insane, preposterous idea, but I managed to persuade him that the chapel was a sound investment. One thing that did bother me greatly was the graveyard at the back of the property, but somehow I persuaded myself it was nothing to concern myself about. After all, it only added to the charm and sentimentality of the place. The little chapel had been erected in 1906 by a woman called Florence, who was eager to introduce the locals in the area to a Christian faith. But it was her spiteful, malicious sister Constance who had filibustered all her sister's dreams due to an intense sibling rivalry and a touch of the green-eyed monster. Professedly, it was a classic Cinderella story, where Florence had been subjected to abuse by a begrudging stepmother who despised Florence, who was stunningly beautiful as a woman, with a heart of an angel. As far as anyone knows, there was a plethora of eager men seeking her hand in marriage, many who were men of sizable means, who could offer Florence a very upper-class standard of living, where she could escape the mediocrity of her lower middle-class life. Florence refused all their gallant proposals, preferring to live a sacrificial life. She was a woman of great faith, believing she was on a mission to spread the good news of the gospel of God's grace. Without doubt, she punnelled all her energy in her mission work, where she worked with a minister, a man called Douglas Wilder, who was the man responsible for building the chapel. It is to be presumed that her invidious sister sabotaged everything that Florence and Douglas did together. In every regard she was jealous of her sister. Constance had never had a marriage proposal a day in her life. It was believed that she physically vandalized her sister's chapel over and over again, while undermining her sister's efforts to grow the chapel's congregation, by spreading vindictive lies, false rumours and nasty gossip about her sister, and also about the minister Douglas Wilder, in order to destroy their generous reputations, incapacitating their ability to do good for the community. Unfortunately, Florence died prematurely from a bout of pneumonia, so her dreams in regards to her mission project were never fully realised or completed. To all intents and purposes, soon afterwards her sister Constance died as well, having caught Florence's raging infection. Maybe divine justice intervened after all. It goes without saying that Constance died a bitter, twisted, angry woman. It would appear that both sisters are buried in the graveyard, but I believe it is Constance who haunts the place to this day, trying to drive people away from the chapel, as she did in life, to extract her ultimate revenge on her sister,
which was why we encountered her wrath when we moved into the chapel. Of course, we knew nothing about the chapel's history when my husband and I purchased the place. I remember being incredibly excited the first time I laid eyes on the chapel. I fell hopelessly in love with it. I knew that I had to have it. Needless to say, my husband Walter did not share my enthusiasm. He wasn't eager to go through with the purchase, but I can be persuasive if needs must. I dreamed of transforming a church building into a sumptuous, cosy home. He said the place gave him the chills. I thought he was being absolutely ridiculous. You see, Walter's not the kind of man that appreciates homes steeped in a rich, vibrant history. It's not to say he doesn't understand the beauty of a historic building, but he'd rather not live in one. If indeed he had his way, I'm in no doubt he would be desirous to buy a modern contemporary home, with seamless glass finishes and plenty of granite. When we purchased the chapel, we hired a couple of builders to transform the interiors, while maintaining the chapel's integrity. The two builders we hired were more than a little eager to get the project finished, as they claimed they felt they were being watched all the time, that they could hear a woman coughing, but there was no one there. It rarely haunted them. They both said they felt as if something definitely didn't want them there. Up until then, I had never believed in paranormal stuff. In truth, I thought it was erroneous. I do remember one of the builders saying to me, "You're very brave, ma'am, to live in a home with a graveyard at the back." I didn't think it was any different to having a family plot, which is often the case in older family homes. Why would this be any different? I even said as much. He said to me, "But ma'am, there are about 70 graves in the back, all from the early 1900s. I honestly didn't know what he was on about. Besides, I thought the graveyard in the back added to the mystique of the place, made the place infinitely more interesting, as graveyards are always fascinating. I could see the others did not share my enthusiasm. Many of my guests who visited the chapel always commented that they wouldn't be comfortable to have a graveyard at the back of the property if they were wearing my shoes, but they weren't, were they? Why should I care what they thought? Once me and Walter moved into the chapel, we always felt as if we were being watched. I kept that feeling at bay, but Walter kept expressing his misgivings about the place. I think we were a bit impulsive buying the chapel, he would say. I get a sense something doesn't want us here. When we were asleep at night in the chapel, there were occasions we heard a woman coughing. I would be preparing a meal in the evenings, and we would often hear her coughing as well. Walter would say, "Did you cough?" I would say, "No, I didn't." He said I could swear I heard someone coughing. Even though I heard the cough, I pleaded ignorance, pretending I hadn't heard it. We began to hear a woman's shoes walking around the chapel at night. Then there were occasions we would see a shadowy form sitting in the pew, but I thought it had to be a trick of the light. I wanted to believe that. One day we were sitting eating dinner, and my glass of wine was flung from the table, shattered against the wall. I was trembling so much, I said to Walter, "Did you see that?" He nodded, his eyes were round, his face discomposed. He said, "I told you, I don't like this place." One day as I was casually strolling in the graveyard, it was the middle of the day, I saw the strange woman wearing a 1900s dress staring at me. I was wondering who she was, and what she was doing in my backyard. She was wearing a frown on her face. But then she dematerialized before my very eyes. It was an airy, surreal feeling. In the weeks that followed, I'd see her shadowy form moving around the chapel. It gave me a cold chill. One night the power went off in our home for no explanation at all. We couldn't get an electric connection, which was exceedingly odd. We'd have to call an electrician out in the morning. So we put a few candles on around the house so that we could see our way clearly if we needed to get up to go to the cloakroom in the middle of the night. I awoke with a sudden start when I heard someone tapping urgently on the window. I cried out in horror when I saw this dark, shadowy silhouette standing outside, looking at me with troubled eyes. The creature seemed undaunted by me. It seemed eager to get my attention. It kept pointing towards the living room area of my home. I realized this creature outside in the backyard looking at me through the window pane was a Bigfoot. It was the scariest creature I've ever seen. This was when I smelt the smoke. I quickly ran towards my husband, shaking him wide awake. He was fast asleep. Hadn't he heard me cry out? We dashed into the living room area, were horrified to find that our settee and one of our rugs was on fire. My husband found the fire retardant foam. We managed to kill the flames. We heard a woman's disembodied laughter as we frantically tried to put out the blaze. Me and my husband had no idea how a Bigfoot knew that our house could potentially have gone down in flames. If that creature hadn't woken us up, I'm almost certain we would be dead, which was a very discomposing thought. My husband perceived that maybe the creature had a great sense of smell, and could smell the smoke from far away, choosing to warn us about the danger we were in. We knew the candle falling over was no accident. It would have had to have been deliberately pushed over intentionally for a fire like that to break out. The next day, when the electrician came to examine our electric box, for some unexplainable reason, the electricity came back on. It was incredulous. Me and my husband called a psychic around to the chapel. She was one of those people that draws pictures of what she sees. She was able to establish a connection with a malevolent ghost called Florence, who she claimed was haunting the chapel. Even in death, she was spewing hatred towards her sister Constance, driven by a vendetta to get everyone out of the chapel, which included me and Walter. She even admitted to tipping over the candle. I remember the psychic drew a picture of the ghostly lady. She was wearing a high-waisted fluted skirt and a puff blouse. I knew it was the very same woman I had physically seen in the graveyard. She also made some inquiries, which is how we found out about the history of the place, which verified her findings about Constance's desire to ruin her sister Florence. Needless to say, after our tumultuous experience in the chapel, me and my husband chose to move out. The psychic assured me that she'd got rid of the ghost of Constance, but she did say there were no guarantees that Constance might come back, a fact I wasn't willing to reveal to our house guest, I'm ashamed to admit. I must confess my husband wasn't best pleased with me when I did this house swap with Skye and Lachlan McNally. He told me that the least I could do was to warn them about the possibility that Constance might be haunting the chapel again, but I couldn't do it. To cut a long story short, after I returned from my incredible holiday in Scotland, Skye opened up to me about everything that had happened to her while staying at the chapel. I realised that the ghost of Constance was back. I couldn't believe it. I also learnt that the Bigfoot female who had warned us about the fire had escorted Skye back to the chapel in a feisty windstorm. Suffice to say, we got an offer on our chapel by a man who loves investigating the paranormal. He bought the haunted chapel from us, claiming that he's seen the ghost of the angry Constance several times. Good luck to him. I wouldn't want to be wearing his shoes, but he claims to love the place. So there you are. That's my story.
Well, hello there. I hope you enjoyed the Omnibus edition. We've got many more coming our way for you to listen to. Sending you love wherever you are in the world, in North America, Canada, Kenya, wherever you may be. I send you lots and lots of love. Thank you for listening to my Omnibus, and I really do hope you enjoyed it, because that's the whole idea about it, is to give you some interesting stories to listen to. So until next time, goodbye and good night.